Black and White, by Liu Jiming, translated by Chen Gang, Part 2, Volume 2, Chapter 3. 1 Yanbei. Several days after returning from Mion Reservoir, Yanbei still felt like she was in a dream when she recalled the scene she had seen at the lakeside mansion. Recently, Yanbei had been piled up with several scripts, making her dizzy daily. She initially didn't have time to go to Mion Reservoir, but Lin Lan was dubbing a foreign film at the TV station and couldn't spare the time to accompany her brother, so she asked Yanbei to fill in. Lin Lan was Yanbei's sister-in-law. They both worked at the TV station. Yanbei was a literary editor in the TV Drama Production Center, and Lin Lan worked in the dubbing department. Although the two were sisters-in-law and colleagues, Yanbei didn't get along very well with her sister-in-law. Apart from the fact that Lin Lan and her brother had always had a tense relationship, she also harbored some dislike for her sister-in-law, who was only 2 years older than her. In fact, Yanbei and Lin Lan were not only colleagues at the TV station, but also alumni of the Beijing Broadcasting Institute. They majored in different subjects. One studied broadcasting and the other studied editing. Lin Lan was 2 grades above Yanbei. She was tall, fair-skinned, and beautiful, exuding an innate star quality in every gesture. When Yanbei first entered the school, Lin Lan was already a popular school belle at the Beijing Broadcasting Institute. She had starred in a movie when she was a sophomore. It was the first anti-espionage film shot in China after the smashing of the Gang of Four. The film crew came to the Beijing Broadcasting Institute to select actors, and the director chose Lin Lan at a glance. Although she played an inconspicuous female spy, Lin Lan gained fame at the Beijing Broadcasting Institute and was also recognized in Beijing's literary and art circles. In Yanbei's eyes, who was still a greenhorn, Lin Lan had already become a dazzling star. Yanbei felt a sense of inferiority and even jealousy whenever she met her on campus. She never thought that Lin Lan would one day become her sister-in-law. Yanbei's brother, Hong Tai-hong, was more than 10 years her senior. When she was starting elementary school, her brother was admitted to Peking University. Soon after, the Cultural Revolution broke out. Before he could finish college, her brother volunteered to become an educated youth at the Great Northern Wilderness. The siblings were already far apart in age, and Hong Tai-hong had been boarding at school since middle school. There were few opportunities for the siblings to get along and communicate, so Yanbei lacked a sense of closeness with her brother for a long time. Therefore, when her brother returned to the city from the Great Northern Wilderness a few years later, wearing a broken cotton-padded coat with cotton wool exposed, he was utterly a stranger in Yanbei's eyes. Her father repeatedly reminded her, "Yanbei, this is your brother, Tai-hong. Your brother is back." She reluctantly called out, "Brother!" and returned to her room. At that time, Yanbei's mother had been dead for several years. Only she and her father were at home, along with a nanny hired from the Luliang Mountains in Shanxi. Yanbei had gotten used to living with 3 people, and her brother's return suddenly added a new member to the family. She was a little unaccustomed to it. Fortunately, she had just been admitted to the Beijing Broadcasting Institute and usually lived at school, returning home only on weekends. Yanbei's mother, Han Ying, had joined the revolution in her teens and was once a female guerrilla captain who terrified the enemy. She had suffered serious injuries while crossing the blockade line during the anti-Japanese war. After giving birth to Tai-hong, she never had any more children. Who knew that when she was nearly 50 years old, she would give birth to Yanbei? Perhaps the advanced age affected her health, and she died of a serious illness not long after. Yanbei only learned after she grew up that her mother had uterine cancer. Although she received the best treatment at the time, it still couldn't save her life. When your mother died, she was tormented by the pain until she was just skin and bones. This was a sentence Yanbei heard her father say about her mother after she became sensible. Yanbei's father, Hong Hu, and mother, Han Ying, met in Yan'an. They went from acquaintance to marriage in less than a month. The matchmaker for them was the old superior of her father, Commander Lin Biao of the 115th Division of the 8th Route Army. Han Ying and Lin Biao were fellow villagers. Hong Hu had followed Lin Biao's First Army Corps while still in Jinggangshan and had experienced 5 counter-encirclement campaigns. After the Red Army began the Long March, they fought all the way from Yudu, Jiangshi to Wuqi Town, Shanxi. Later, they rushed from Yan'an to the anti-Japanese front and became a fierce general of the 115th Division. When Taihang was born, Hong Hu led a regiment of the 8th Route Army in the Taihang Mountains to fight against the Japanese and puppet troops who were carrying out a mopping-up operation. This battle, commanded by Commander Lin Biao, was later known as the Pingxingguan Victory. Just after the battle ended, Hong Hu received a telegram from Yan'an. Han Ying sent the telegram, and the message was only a few short words. Son born smoothly, hoping for a name. Hong Hu, who was leading his troops to clean up the battlefield, was overjoyed. He held a crooked-handle machine gun that he had just seized, raised his head, looked up at the rolling Taihang Mountains and the smoky battlefield, waved his hand and said, "Taihang, let's call him Taihang." Hong Hu's experience of naming his son was later written as a side story by a military writer in an army history that reflected the Pingxingguan Victory. When Yanbei read it in the Red Flag Fluttering series published by the PLA Literature and Art Publishing House in middle school, a feeling of pride she had never felt before surged in her heart. After returning home, she pestered her father about the whole story and asked curiously, "Dad, you have such a wonderful story when you named my brother. Is there also a story behind the name you gave me?" Her father habitually frowned, pondered for a moment, and answered, "A story, of course there is. The year you were born, your mother participated in a social education work team in Yanbei, Shanxi. It wasn't until she was about to give birth that I arranged for someone to take her back to Beijing. Maybe the conditions there were difficult and she was malnourished. You weighed less than 5 pounds when you were born." Yanbei felt a weight in her heart when she heard this. Although her mother had been dead for several years, she still felt a deep sadness and even guilt from her father's eyes and expression. Yanbei couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Compared with the heroic origin of her brother's name, her own name paled in comparison. In addition to her name, she couldn't compare to her brother in terms of the era in which she was born. Yanbei envied her brother for being born in such an era of war horses and heroes. She even felt that her brother's decision to go to the Great Northern Wilderness to pursue an education after not finishing college was also a feat comparable to her father's leading the 8th Route Army in the Pingxingguan Victory. For a while, Yanbei regretted that she was born too late and missed the opportunity for educated youth to go to the mountains and the countryside. Because when she graduated from middle school, the tumultuous cultural revolution had already come to an end. Hong Taihang was unemployed for a while after returning to the city and was idle at home. Perhaps to bridge the gap between him and his sister, he would call her to his room every weekend when Yanbei came home and tell her about his experiences in the Great Northern Wilderness. Hong Taihang spent 8 years in the Great Northern Wilderness. Before returning to the city, he had already risen to a regimental-level cadre in the Heilongjiang Production and Construction Corps and was on the verge of being promoted to the deputy division level. Among the educated youth who went from Beijing to the Great Northern Wilderness, no one but your brother can reach this level, he said to his sister Yanbei in a tone of pride. The crescent-shaped scar on his left face shone brightly, like a dazzling metal. I didn't rely on my father's connections. I could climb to this position entirely through my own efforts, he said, rummaging through his old leather suitcase he had brought back when he returned to the city and taking out a stack of medals and certificates. In the winter of 1969, there were constant conflicts on the Sino-Soviet border, and the situation was agitated. Small groups of Soviet troops often harassed the border. One night, I led a platoon of soldiers from the Production and Construction Corps to lie in ambush on the Sino-Soviet border, preparing to intercept the invading Soviet troops. The temperature that night was minus 30 degrees. We lay in the snow for the whole night. I already had arthritis in my legs. By dawn, the enemy hadn't arrived, but my legs were so frozen that I couldn't stand up. Cheng Tui, long legs, carried me on his back for more than 10 kilometers through the snow before I reached the garrison hospital, where I stayed for over 20 days before I could walk again. He picked out the largest bronze medal, gently caressing it, and said, "This corps medal was awarded after that operation. It's the highest honor in our corps." Yanbei curiously took the medal from her brother's hand and weighed it, which was heavy. Due to the long time, the color of the medal had become somewhat dull and was covered with dirt, like a cultural relic excavated from the ground. But the words on it were still clearly visible. "Raisu Vigilance, defend the motherland." It was Chairman Mao's handwriting. Yanbei felt almost worshipful towards her brother. She felt this when she read novels such as The Gadfly and How the Steel Was Tempered as a child. In an instant, Yanbei almost regarded her brother as the hero she had admired as a child, and the strangeness she had previously felt towards him disappeared significantly. But a question quickly popped into her. "Since you were about to be promoted, why did you return to the city?" Hearing this, her brother didn't answer for a while. After a long time, he said, "The Cultural Revolution has been negated. What am I doing staying there?" Yanbei found that her brother's eyes were a little confused when he said this, and the corners of his mouth showed a hint of bitterness, as if he had smoked too much. Although her brother had been back in the city for quite some time, he hadn't gotten rid of the habit of smoking Mojave tobacco in the great northern wilderness. The house was filled with a strong smell of tobacco leaves, and Yanbei couldn't stand it. She opened the window to let fresh air in and feel better. She carefully pondered her brother's words and remembered hearing that her brother had led the Red Guards to ransack the home of his middle school teacher during the Cultural Revolution and had crippled the teacher's arm. She seemed to understand what the bitterness in the corners of his mouth meant. Hong Tai-hong didn't stay idle at home for long before he went to work at the newly established National Development and Reform Commission of the State Council. The Heilongjiang Production and Construction Corps was a military organization. According to regulations, military cadres transferred to local positions were to be demoted by one rank. However, her brother was not demoted but was appointed as a section chief in the Policy and Regulations Department, a position comparable to a regimental commander. A section chief in a department directly under the state council was much more valuable than a regimental commander in the military or a county-level cadre in the local government. Yanbei knew that this was all thanks to her father. With her father's status as a founding general, her brother's appointment could not have been made without consideration. Yanbei and her brother knew this, but she hadn't made it clear to her brother, and she never dared mention this matter to her father. Not to inquire about political affairs was the family rule her father had set for them. After Yanbei came into this world, she first saw the pattern of a divine dog on the ceiling when she opened her eyes. Dogs were the totem of shamanism. The divine dog was painted black all over, but its eyes were a deep, vibrant red. At first glance, it looked like two volcanic craters spewing out flames, which was terrifying. Yanbei was so scared that she burst into tears. Even in kindergarten, Yanbei didn't dare look directly at the divine dog pattern on the ceiling and wouldn't even stay in the room alone, fearing that the ferocious divine dog would jump down from the ceiling and take her away. At that time, Yanbei's mother, Han Ying, had already passed away, and her brother, Tai Hong, was in middle school and usually lived at school, only returning home on weekends or holidays. Her father, who worked at the National Defense Science and Technology Commission, was very busy and went to work every morning at dawn and didn't return until dark. He rarely had time to coax Yanbei during meals, but as soon as he put down his chopsticks, he would retreat to his room to review documents or make phone calls, leaving his secretary and guards to run around in circles. Her father's room was located in the East Wing, which housed both his bedroom and office. It was larger than the combined area of Yanbei and the nanny's rooms. In Suhdu, in addition to furniture such as a bed, there was a massive desk with thick documents on it. The most eye-catching thing was 2 telephones, one black and one red. Whenever her father returned home, the 2 phones would beep non-stop. Whenever her father entered the room, he would close the door tightly, and no one in the family dared to break in without permission. Once, on a weekend, her father practiced swords in the courtyard, and her brother sneaked into the east wing without permission. Her father found out and severely scolded him. From then on, her father's room became a forbidden area for the siblings, and Yanbei and her brother never dared to cross the line. To prevent Yanbei from disturbing her father, the nanny would always carefully take her to the courtyard, where she would cultivate and prune the potted plants while humming lullabies to her. The lullabies the nanny hummed were "Playing with Children" from Yanbei Shanxi, "Going out to cut wheat, the sickle is not sharp, now there is no way, begging for food back," and "Thinking of you in the streets and alleys during the day, thinking of you at night, the lamp can't be blown out." Yanbei didn't understand the content of the lyrics, but she felt that the lullabies were lovely. The melody and the nanny's voice were very beautiful. 2. Niuniu. The nanny was from Yanbei Shanxi and spoke the Shanxi dialect. Even her name had a strong Shanxi accent, Niuniu. This was her nickname, but her father always called her that, and Yanbei and her brother also called her that, Aunt Niuniu. They never knew her full name. Since she spent more time with Niuniu than with her father and brother, Yanbei's speech also developed a Shanxi accent, evident in phrases like "good to hear" as "show to hear" and "I" as "er." Her brother often laughed at her when he heard this, but her father didn't take it seriously. Instead, he nodded in approval. "Well, good. Your mother and I are both destined to be with Shanxi." As her father spoke, his two frowning eyebrows stretched out uncharacteristically. When Yanbei grew up, he realized that Niuniu and his parents had a deep connection. In 1942, the anti-Japanese war was at its most challenging period. General Okamura Yasuji, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Expeditionary Force in North China, commanded hundreds of thousands of Japanese troops to carry out a brutal sweep of the 8th Route Army in Shanxi, Chahar, and Hebei. The 115th Division of the 8th Route Army, where Yanbei's father, Hong Hu, was divided into small pieces and retreated from the Taihang Mountains to the Luliang Mountains. Hong Hu led the independent regiment to a station in a small mountain village called Liu Linbao, less than 30 kilometers away from Linquan Town, the county town of Linxian County. When the Red Army crossed the Yellow River in 1936, it was stationed here for a short time, and an anti-Japanese democratic regime was established. The mass base was good. The village chief of Liu Linbao was a party member who was developed when the Red Army crossed the Yellow River to the east. His name was Liu Dashan, and his nickname, Liu Laoguda, also knew him. Hong Hu and the headquarters of the independent regiment were located in his home. Liu Laoguda was a bricklayer. Apart from the busy farming season, he often walked around the streets and villages with a bricklayer knife on his waist, taking on some wall-building work to earn money to support his family. He took the opportunity to secretly develop some party members. After the 115th Division arrived in Lin County, the masses' anti-Japanese and military support work was lively, thanks to these secret party members developed by Liu Laoguda. Liu Laoguda had a daughter named Niuniu, who was only 16 or 17 years old. She had 2 big black braids, her face was as round as a full moon, and her personality was lively and generous. She was learning to sing Shua Higher with others, and continued singing the song throughout the day. One day, early in the morning, Hong Hu came back from outside to check on the post and saw Niuniu practicing her voice in the yard, so he stopped and listened for a while. Niuniu was singing Zhu Shiku. Hong Hu had heard the Xintianyu in northern Shanxi more than once. At this moment, he heard Niuniu singing and felt it had a different charm. "Brother, you go west. It's tough to keep the little sister." Holding the brother's hand, delivered to the gate. "Hold your brother's hand tightly. Tears in my eyes can't stop flowing. You have to walk on the main road. There are many people on the road." After the song ended, Hong Hu couldn't help but clap his hands. Niuniu then realized that someone was eavesdropping, and her pretty face immediately flushed. Soon after the independent regiment entered Liu Linbao, it was attacked by the devils. The evening before the incident, Liu Guda went to the neighboring village to collect food for the independent regiment. As soon as he came to a valley not far from the village, he saw a large group of Japanese troops and the imperial army rushing towards Liu Bao. The devils had at least 1 battalion, plus the puppet army, and their strength far exceeded that of the independent regiment. They were so dense that they filled the entire valley. There were militia sentries and message trees on the hilltops near the village, but it was already dark then. The devils took advantage of the cover of night and the woods to cover the militia on the top of the mountain. If the devils sneaked into the village like this, not only would the independent regiment suffer, but the people of the whole village would also suffer. Liu Guda was anxious, so he took out a tortoise shell from his arm. It was given to him by Hong Hu, the deputy brigade commander of the 8th Route Army and the commander of the independent regiment. It was a trophy seized from the devils. Liu Guda fired 2 shots at the buttocks of the devil team. The Japanese troops scattered like wild bees whose nest was blown up. Then a small group of Japanese soldiers surrounded the place where Liu Guda was hiding. Only 5 bullets were in the tortoise shell, and they were soon used up. Seeing the enemy rushing up with the Type 38 rifle, Liu Guda threw away the tortoise shell, took out the only grenade from his waist, opened the lid and resolutely pulled the fuse. The fuse hissed, and a puff of green smoke rose. When the approaching Japanese saw it, before they had time to turn around and flee, the grenade in Liu Guda's hand exploded. With a loud bang, the valley's silence was broken, and the militia sentry on the top of the mountain was alarmed. After the independent regiment learned of the urgent enemy situation, it quickly organized both military personnel and civilians to evacuate Liulin village, thus averting a catastrophe. In June 1945, on the eve of the victory of the anti-Japanese war, the Jinchaji military region held a commendation meeting for anti-Japanese heroes and models. Liu Guda was posthumously recognized as an anti-Japanese hero and model. After the victory of the anti-Japanese war, Hong Hu took the opportunity to visit Liu Bao with the troops stationed in Linfen once. He found Liu Guda's tomb on the hillside where the militia sentry was set up that year, burned 3 incense sticks for this anti-Japanese hero who was a bricklayer, and performed a solemn military salute. He originally wanted to visit Liu Guda's relatives. Still, when he entered the village, he found that not long after Liu Guda's death, his daughter Niuniu had gotten married, and the man was a wheat picker from Yanbei. At that time, the independent regiment had moved with the 115th Division. To guard against enemy retaliation, Niuniu took her mother and 2 younger brothers away when she got married. Hong Hu looked at the dilapidated cave house of Liu Guda's family and felt a sense of loss in his heart. For many years, Hong Hu often thought of Liu Guda, the anti-Japanese hero in Luliang Mountain who died heroically while reporting to the independent regiment. Whenever he talked about the past with his wife, Han Ying, he always remembered, "I wonder how Liu Guda's daughter Niuniu is doing now. She sang Zoshiku so beautifully." In the early 1960s, Han Ying went to Yanbei, Shanxi, to participate in the socialist education movement and stayed in a village called Pizhuang. The secretary of the Pizhuang production brigade was Guo Maolin, a middle-aged man with a dark, ruddy complexion. When he was young, he was a wheat picker. His family was very poor. He worked in the Luliang Mountains throughout the year. He was almost 30 years old and had not married. He did not return to the village until the victory of the anti-Japanese war. He married a woman 10 years his junior and was very popular for a while. When Han Ying was staying in the village, he lived at Secretary Guo's house and had his meals there daily. Secretary Guo's wife was not only beautiful, but also a good cook. Han Ying had stomach problems and couldn't eat the hard and rough steamed buns. Secretary Guo's wife made buckwheat dumpling soup for her. This was originally a typical meal in Yanbei rural areas, but after being cooked by Secretary Guo's wife, it became an incredibly delicious delicacy. After eating it for some time, Han Ying's old stomach problems disappeared. Once, Han Ying returned from a meeting outside and passed by the kitchen. She saw the wife of Party Secretary Guo cooking and humming a little tune. I went out to cut wheat, but my sickle was not sharp. Now I have no choice but to come back to beg for food. On the eve of the victory of the anti-Japanese war, Han Ying worked in Luliang Mountain for a while. She was surprised to hear that she was singing the folk tune Shua Higher, popular in the Luliang area. At this time, the wife of the village party secretary heard someone enter the house and stopped talking. She turned around and saw that it was Han Ying. She blushed like a young girl and said embarrassedly, "I'm sorry to make you laugh, Comrade Han." Han Ying applauded and laughed. "It's wonderful. You sang Shua Higher, right?" The wife of the party secretary nodded. Han Ying asked curiously, "How can you sing the little song of Luliang Mountain?" The secretary's wife hesitated and said, "My mother's family is from Luliang Mountain." Han Ying said, "Oh," and asked in the Yanbei dialect that she had just learned, "Where is Luliang Mountain?" The secretary's wife said, "Liulinbao, Lin County." Han Ying's heart skipped a beat when she heard the name of the familiar place. "What's your father's name?" The secretary's wife said, "Liu Dashan, Liu Laogeda." Before the secretary's wife finished speaking, Han Ying stared at her with wide eyes and asked, "Is your name Niuniu?" The other party was stunned and nodded. Han Ying stepped forward, held her hand tightly, and couldn't say a word. Later, after being reported by the masses, the social education team found out that Guo Maolin had embezzled more than 300 kilograms of buckwheat and more than 100 yuan in cash from the village during the Great Leap Forward. He was dismissed from his position as the party secretary of the Pizhuang Brigade and spent 2 years in prison. Before the social education team left Pizhuang, Han Ying went to Guo's house. She did not go to see Guo Maolin, but to see Niuniu. It was dark at that time. Niuniu was cooking. The pot was boiling buckwheat dumpling soup, which was steaming out. An alluring aroma floated in the house. Niuniu was squatting at the stove door and stuffing firewood into the stove. When she saw Han Ying go in, she did not even raise her head. Han Ying was silent and asked, "Niuniu, the work team dealt with Lao Guo. Do you hate me?" Niuniu continued to stuff firewood into the stove, and tears gradually filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "Comrade Han, you are right. Lao Guo made a mistake. If my father were still alive, he would never forgive him. If you don't deal with him, you won't be the 8th Root Army." After saying this, Niuniu ducked her head. The fire from the stove made her face red. She looked so beautiful, like a bright red hollyhock flower. Yanbei heard from her father that her mother had been recovering very slowly since giving birth to her. Her father wanted to hire a nanny to care for the mother and daughter and asked her mother for her opinion. Her mother hesitated momentarily and said, "I miss the buckwheat dumplings made by Niuniu. I wonder if she is willing to come." My father sent someone to Yanbei to talk to Niuniu, and Niuniu packed her things and came without saying a word. At that time, her husband, Guo Maolin, had not yet been released. In Yanbei's memory, the impression of her mother, Han Ying, has always been vague. When she grew up, if it weren't for the portrait hanging in her father's study and office, she could hardly remember what her mother looked like. No wonder when her mother died, Yanbei was less than 3 years old, and Niuniu raised her. Sometimes she even felt that her mother was not as close to her as Niuniu. 3 Courtyard No. 9. In the second year after Yanbei's father, Hong Hu, was awarded the rank of general, the whole family moved into No. 9 Bingma Hutong. At that time, Yanbei's older brother, Tai Hung, was in middle school. At the same time, Yanbei, who had not yet been born, was still nestled in her mother's womb and was participating in the socialist education movement in the rural Yanbei region of Shanxi. Heading east from Jingshan Park for less than 500 meters, a turn at a crossroads leads to the residential area near Beihai Park. The houses here stand shoulder to shoulder, as dense as a honeycomb, one hutong string into another, crisscrossing like candied haws on a stick. Everything dates back to the Ming and Qing dynasties, from the courtyards of ordinary families to the mansions of high-ranking officials. Every brick in the hutong, every stone dog guarding a courtyard gate, exudes the thick atmosphere of old Beijing. Hugging the shore of Hohai Lake lies Bingma Hutong. It's just wide enough for a 4-horse carriage to pass through. The ground is paved with uniform, neatly arranged large blue bricks, the same kind used on the Tianmen City Gate Tower. Each brick is over a foot long and over half a foot thick. Worn smooth and rounded by years of foot traffic and carriage wheels, the blue bricks gleam with a faint blue reflection in the sunlight, or after the rain, exceptionally dazzling. The Beijing Gazetteer records that this hutong is named after the residence of Ming Andali, the Grand Commandant during the Qing dynasty. Ming Andali, a plain white banner Mongol member, became Grand Commandant in the 18th year of the Shunji Emperor's reign. The emperor rewarded him with a mansion built beside Beihai Lake. The Grand Commandant was equivalent to the Minister of War, hence the name Bingma Hutong, Soldiers and Horses Hutong. Number 9. Bingma Hutong was the Grand Commandant's residence. Ming Andali's mother was the daughter of a shaman priestess, so he imbued Number 9 Bingma Hutong with a shamanistic style. He placed 2 stone dogs at the main entrance and had shamanic totems painted on the ceilings of every room. During the Republic of China period, Number 9 Bingma Hutong was first occupied by a general under the Fengtian warlord Zhang Zuolin. During the Japanese occupation, it became the official residence of a deputy commander of the North China Pacification Army. During the Chinese Civil War, a senior advisor to General Fu Zuoyi, he commander-in-chief of the North China Bandit Suppression Headquarters, lived at Number 9 Bingma Hutong for less than half a year before the entire country was liberated. The residents of Bingma Hutong referred to this extraordinary residence as Number 9 Courtyard. Almost every change of dynasty brought a new master to Number 9 Courtyard. Because the owners were figures of great importance, their arrival was always a grand affair, akin to a festival, attracting the attention of everyone in the hutong. However, this time was somewhat of an exception because a significant renovation occurred at Number 9 Courtyard just before the new owners moved in. The original Number 9 Courtyard had dozens of rooms, large and small, with pavilions, terraces, gardens, and ponds, no less impressive than the residence of a Qing dynasty prince. Now, most of Number 9 Courtyard had been converted into a community kindergarten, leaving only a 2-courtyard residence. In many people's eyes, although the Number 9 Courtyard still symbolized prestige and prominence, it was no longer comparable to the Grand Commandant's mansion of the past. The new owner, although a general in the new government, did not make a grand spectacle of moving in as the previous owners had done. Instead, he came with a small entourage, keeping a low profile. This made the residents of Bingma Hutong feel that the new people's government was indeed different from all the previous dynasties. Yanbei, who was born and raised in Number 9 Courtyard, couldn't comprehend the feelings of the hutong residents. Still, from a young age, she was aware of the distance and difference between her and the other residents of Bingma Hutong. This distance and difference were not as simple as a courtyard wall. She lived in a different world from most people in the hutong. Not only did her father have a car and a bodyguard to take him to and from work, but sentries were also standing guard at the gate of Number 9 Courtyard. Strangers, let alone the neighbors, were not allowed to enter without permission. With her father at work and her brother boarding at middle school, she couldn't even find someone to talk to besides Niuniu. The vast courtyard remained quiet all day, like a temple deep in the mountains. No matter how noisy it was outside, it remained silent. Yanbei felt a deep sense of loneliness and isolation. Niuniu always had endless chores. After finishing the housework, she would go to the backyard vegetable garden to plant vegetables. The backyard used to be a neglected small garden. Still, after Niuniu arrived, she reclaimed the land and planted a variety of seasonal vegetables, including string beans, scallions, eggplants, peppers, and potatoes. Niuniu had brought the seeds from Yanbei's hometown. The harvested yams were big and round, delicious for cooking, and even more fragrant when roasted. Whenever Niuniu worked in the small garden, she would bring a small stool for Yanbei to sit beside her. Sometimes she would catch a little dragonfly from the string bean trellis to play with. To alleviate Yanbei's boredom, she would also sing her hometown folk song, Shua Hair, playing with baby, Zhu Shiku, walking to the West Pass. Brother, you're walking to the West Pass. Little sister really can't bear to let you go. Holding your hand, I see you off to the entrance. Yanbei was young and didn't fully understand the lyrics, but she thought Niuniu sang beautifully. Although she was in her 40s, her voice was still so clear and melodious. Sometimes, when Niuniu was busy with other chores and couldn't take care of Yanbei, she would quietly walk out of the courtyard, go to the main gate, sit on the blue stone threshold, and stare blankly at the 2 stone dogs through the small square opening in the gate. The children's singing and chanting from the kindergarten next door would waft over, tickling her heart like a feather. Soon, the school bell would ring, and the kindergarten children would pour out like a swarm of bees, groups of 3 or 5, playing games like kicking a shuttlecock and hopscotch in the hutong. Once, a shuttlecock flew through the small square opening into number 9 courtyard. 2 little girls peered inside, crouching by the small square opening. The sentry uncle told them to leave. Seeing this, Yanbei picked up the shuttlecock from the ground and handed it to them through the small square opening. The 2 girls took the shuttlecock, smiled at Yanbei, made a face, and skipped away. Watching their lively figures, Yanbei felt a deep-seated envy. Later, Yanbei also went to kindergarten, but not in Bingma Hutong. Instead, she attended the military kindergarten, where the parents of her playmates were all military leaders, like her father. Yanbei was also driven to kindergarten in her father's car every day. Sometimes her father would drop her off on his way to or from work, and sometimes Auntie Niuniu would take her. It was the same when she came home from school. Although the environment and conditions of the military kindergarten were often better than those of the Bingma Hutong kindergarten, Yanbei still envied the little girls kicking shuttlecocks in Bingma Hutong. When the Cultural Revolution began, Yanbei was already in elementary school. The chauffeured car to and from school was canceled. For some time, middle schools and universities suspended classes to protest, and many elementary schools followed suit. Yanbei enjoyed a period of freedom at home. 2 years later, the September 13th incident shocked China and the world. As an old subordinate who had once been deeply valued by Lin Biao, Yanbei's father was also implicated and suspended from his duties for 2 years. During his suspension, not only was he stripped of his personal bodyguards, secretaries, and chauffeured car, but the sentry post at number 9 courtyard was also removed. However, Yanbei not only didn't feel like she had lost anything, but instead felt a sense of lightness from being released from constraints. With no more sentries at the door, the neighborhood kids could come in and play at any time. Number 9 courtyard, which many had previously considered unfathomable, suddenly became lively and bustling. Yanbei would invite classmates or neighborhood friends over to play on weekends or holidays. The courtyard was large, and they could play all the games in the hutong. For a time, number 9 courtyard, like the common dazayuan, communal courtyard where ordinary people lived, was filled with the noisy, bustling atmosphere of daily life. Whenever this happened, Yanbei's father would smile and watch the children frolicking like birds, looking like an ordinary old man from the hutong. The intimidating demeanor and authority of a general were gone. After being suspended, her father spent his days at home, tending to the flowers and plants. He even planted a dozen grapevines in the open space in the front courtyard. When Yanbei came home from school, she would also help her father with some work. Over time, she learned a whole set of gardening skills from her father, such as fertilizing, loosening the soil, watering, and pruning. The father and daughter would chat while they worked. Her father would ask Yanbei, "What new songs have you learned at school recently? Sing one for me." Yanbei would sing "Learn from Comrade Lei Feng." Her father would praise it, then volunteer, "Let me sing one for you too." He would clear his throat and sing, "Going out to cut wheat, the sickle's not sharp, Now there's no way, have to beg back home." Her father's voice was a bit hoarse, with a hint of his hometown accent, and the lyrics were a bit unclear, but Yanbei felt that the tune was very familiar. She had heard Auntie Niuniu sing it before. "The Shua hair from the Luliang Mountains, Niuniu sings it so beautifully, your mother and I loved listening to her sing." Yanbei saw that her father looked a little sad when he said this. Was he missing his mother, who had passed away many years ago? Or did he recall the years of war he had spent in the Luliang Mountains during the anti-Japanese war? At the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, her father sent Niuniu back to her hometown in Yanbei, and her older brother, Taihang, went to the Great Northern Wilderness. Only the father and daughter were left to depend on each other in Number 9 Courtyard. In Yanbei's memory, that was her happiest time with her father. Chapter 4. 1. Salon in the Courtyard. In fact, Yanbei's trip to the Mian Reservoir wasn't to fill in for her sister-in-law, Lin Lan, but because of a single sentence from her brother, Hong Taihang. "Little sister, guess who's going to Mian this time?" Who else could it be? Just your bunch of cronies, right? Yanbei curled her lips dismissively. She was always unrestrained in front of her brother, sometimes coming across as too harsh. Hong Taihang didn't seem to mind, displaying the tolerance and generosity expected of an older brother. Sitting in his wheelchair, he habitually tapped his fingers on the chrome armrest, deliberately building suspense. "These aren't just any cronies. You might even want to see him." "Who?" "Longlegs." Yanbei's heart skipped a beat. Her brother's friends were all his former classmates and comrades from the production and construction corps. Many of their parents were also high-ranking military officers. During the Cultural Revolution, some individuals went to factories, while others went to the countryside, and they struggled alongside workers and peasants for many years. After the downfall of the Gang of Four, they gradually returned to Beijing. Now, primarily thanks to their parents' connections, they held good positions in various ministries of the central government, all looking pleased as punch and riding high. After Hong Taihang returned from the Great Northern Wilderness, he gathered these friends together, much like a secret agent re-establishing a network, to chat, drink, sing, and dance, forming a small salon. Every weekend his friends would converge from all parts of the city, crowding his room in the back courtyard. Some brought a bottle or two of imported brandy, others a Jinhua ham, and still others a roast chicken. They would eat and drink while spouting off about everything. They discussed current events and politics, from the newly completed Shijimen overpass and the soon-to-be-built West Railway Station to the death of Tito, the Rural Household Contract Responsibility System, the Factory Director Responsibility System, and high-level personnel changes. Each of them put on the airs of a statesman, pontificating and writing passionately as if they had seen through all the world's major events. Like many university students of that era, Yanbei was also somewhat interested in current events and politics. If she happened to be home from the Broadcasting Institute for the weekend, she would occasionally listen in. "I recently read Soviet General Secretary Gorbachev's Perestroika, New Thinking for Our Country and the World. The Chinese version hasn't come out yet. I read the English version. I suggest everyone read this book carefully." A skinny man with glasses and a refined appearance said unhurriedly from the sofa. Yanbei had heard her brother introduce him as Zhang Haiyang, a classmate of her brother at Peking University who worked in the State Council Research Office. Before retiring, his father had served as a Vitsu Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs. "Why don't you introduce the book's main points to everyone first?" Hong Taihang said in the tone of a host. He sat in an old rattan chair, moved from his father's study, occupying the center position among the group, and gave the impression of being the center of attention. Hong Taihang seemed to have had the talent to be a leader from a young age. Wherever he went, he could quickly create an aura centered on himself. Not only those younger than him, but even those older than him always called him Big Brother. Before Hong Taihang could finish speaking, others chimed in. "Yes, Zhang, you're so knowledgeable and have access to information. Please tell us about it." Zhang Haiyang cleared his throat and said calmly, "Gorbachev believes that today's world is diverse and integrated. Humanity must combine its strengths to protect itself and benefit not only today, but also tomorrow and the future. Politicians and leaders of all countries should base their international politics on society's moral and ethical standards, thereby making international relations more humane and humanitarian. Nuclear war threatens the survival and development of mankind, and there is no longer a causal relationship between war and revolution. Security is primarily a political issue and must be global and comprehensive. Regarding foreign relations, there must be strategic flexibility to make mutually acceptable compromises when necessary. Instead of confrontation, dialogue and mutual understanding should be the goals. Under the guidance of Gorbachev's new thinking, the Soviet Union has significantly adjusted its foreign policy in recent years, resulting in profound changes in the global situation and the international strategic landscape since World War II. He paused slightly and said in a cautionary tone, "Everyone remembers the phrase, 'The world today is a diverse and integrated whole.' It's a fundamental shift from Mao Zedong's life and death thinking mode, characterized by the notion that either the east wind prevails over the west wind or the west wind prevails over the east wind. Look, Tito just died, and Yugoslavia is already implementing market-oriented reforms. It was the first socialist country to abandon the planned economy model. And considering what Deng Xiaoping said not long ago when he met with U.S. President Reagan and British Prime Minister Thatcher, we can fully expect that a completely new era has arrived." Listening to Jiang Haiyang's passionate words, everyone exchanged glances, their faces showing excitement. Some even clenched their fists and waved them, shouting approval. The duck is the first to know when the river warms in spring. Our National Development and Reform Commission has already started to move. We recently drafted a plan for enterprise reform and submitted it to the State Council. It's said that the Premier admires it, Hong Tai-hung said, unable to contain his excitement, and turned his gaze to a tall young man sitting by the sofa. "Long legs, aren't you a secretary to a central leader? Politics is your forte. Why aren't you saying anything?" Longlegs was named Chen Yiming. Because he was tall and had long legs, Hong Tai-hung always called him Longlegs. Chen Yiming was Hong Tai-hung's comrade in the Heilongjiang Production and Construction Corps and had saved his life. In addition, Chen Yiming's father, Chen Shanhu, was an old comrade-in-arms of Hong Tai-hung's father, Hong Hu, so their relationship was even more special. Chen Yiming was a few years younger than Hong Tai-hung. While Tai-hung was studying at Peking University, he was still in middle school. Although they went to the Production and Construction Corps together, he returned to the city 2 years earlier than Tai-hung. In 1976, he was recommended to Peking University as a worker-peasant-soldier student. After graduating, he was assigned to the General Office of the Central Committee, where he served as a secretary to a central leader. "I can't really talk about doing politics," Chen Yiming said, whether it was modesty or politeness. While Jiang Haiyang pontificated, he remained silent, constantly smoking. His hair was a bit long, making him look unkempt. It was already April, and the weather was getting warmer every day. The heating had long been turned off, but he wore a faded military overcoat. This kind of dress was very popular in Beijing more than 10 years ago, but now it was rarely seen. In recent years, Beijing's appearance, including people's clothing, food, housing, and transportation, had changed almost every year. Just look at the clothes everyone in this room was wearing. They looked like they had just stepped out of a fashion store, elegant and stylish. In contrast, Chen Yiming seemed out of place, as if he came from another world. Seeing Chen Yiming declining to speak, Hong Tai-hung, relying on their close relationship, retorted impolitely, "Come on, don't be so modest. Who doesn't know that you, the great secretary, will be promoted and reused as a professional politician? No one in this room is qualified if you're not involved in politics. Haiyang, don't you agree?" A restrained smile appeared on Jiang Haiyang's face, and he said with a hint of teasing, "That's right. Yiming, you're a secretary to a central leader, so you definitely stand higher and see farther than the rest of us." Seeing that he couldn't decline any longer, Chen Yiming had to put out the half-smoked cigarette in the ashtray and say, "I haven't read the book Haiyang mentioned yet. I've only read excerpts and introductions from an internal reference document issued by the Central Committee to the county and regimental levels. I agree with some of the views presented in Gorbachev's book, such as his analysis of the changes in the world situation and the international strategic landscape since World War II. Additionally, I concur with his assertion that, in terms of foreign relations, strategic flexibility is necessary and that the goal of mutual understanding should be the primary objective. I have reservations about the domestic reform aspect. Although the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and China are all socialist countries, there are significant differences in their histories and national conditions, and we cannot blindly replicate their experiences. Especially when formulating major policies, we cannot act impulsively and be too eager to achieve quick results. Writing documents in the office differs from performing practical work. Sometimes clauses that seem impeccable in policy documents may not be reasonable or feasible in a specific environment. Let me share a personal experience. Not long ago, the chief sent me to C County for research. A cotton spinning mill was established in the early 1970s. It's a large collective enterprise. It was very prosperous when it first went into operation, and its textile products held a significant share of the provincial and even national markets. But in recent years, with the increasing market competition, its sales have plummeted to the point of being on the verge of bankruptcy. 2 years ago, C County, following the central government's reform spirit, implemented the contract responsibility system in its cotton mill. The newly appointed director signed a contract with the county, promising to turn losses into profits within 3 years. In addition to having the right to operate independently, the contracted director also had the right to appoint and dismiss cadres and employees. To complete the profit and tax targets, the director laid off nearly 1/3 of the factory's employees at once. Reducing staff to increase efficiency is not only in line with the central government's reform policy, but also a legitimate right granted to him when he contracted the cotton mill. It's impeccable. But those laid-off workers suddenly lost their jobs and their livelihoods disappeared. Out of anger, they gathered together and surrounded the county party committee and government. In the end, the county finance department allocated funds to pay each laid-off worker compensation before the issue was resolved. This illustrates a fact. From the day the People's Republic was founded, the people have regarded the party and the government as their backbone and support. When they encounter difficulties, they first turn to the government for solutions. That's why our governments at all levels are referred to as people's governments. What is the national condition? This is China's national condition. When we undertake reforms, every step we take is inseparable from this specific national context, and we must consider the interests of the majority of the people. Chen Yiming stopped there and picked up the half-smoked cigarette from the ashtray, lit it, and took a puff. No one in the room spoke, and their faces didn't even show whether they agreed or disagreed. Clearly, Chen Yiming's words didn't resonate with everyone. Jiang Haiyang's face even showed a look of disdain. Even Hong Taihang's attitude was a bit ambiguous, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Chen Yiming stood up. "Sorry, you guys continue chatting. I'll take my leave," he said, tugging at the collar of his open overcoat, and strode towards the outside. When he reached the door, his gaze lingered on Yanbei's face for a moment, as if he had just seen her, and he gave her a faint smile. Hong Taihang also stood up and saw Chen Yiming out of the room. At this moment, someone muttered, "Didn't they say Chen Yiming's thinking is very open? Why is he like a woman with bound feet?" That leader of his is a conservative in the party. As a secretary, how can he not be influenced? Jiang Haiyang added sarcastically. Ignoring the buzzing discussions around her, Yanbei followed him out. When she reached the courtyard, Chen Yiming was already gone, and her heart suddenly felt empty. 2. Long legs. This was not the first time Yanbei had met Chen Yiming. About 10 years ago, Yanbei was still in middle school. Although his father had not fully resumed his military duties, he had already started working. He went to a military enterprise in Miyun County for research during those days, leaving Yanbei and Niuniu alone at home. It was summer, and the school was on summer vacation. The weather was extremely hot. The grapevines that his father had planted a few years ago were now lush and leafy, with a cool shade and bunches of crystal-clear grapes hanging on the branches. The family couldn't finish eating them, so his father asked Niuniu to give some to the neighbors in the alley, Hutong. That morning, Yanbei was sitting on a chair under the grape trellis, enjoying the cool while reading a book. She was reading The Red and the Black. After the Cultural Revolution began, foreign novels of this kind were rarely seen in bookstores or libraries, so she found it in her brother's box. The big box was locked, and Yanbei put a lot of effort into opening it. She called Aunt Niuniu over and used pliers to pry open the lock. When she opened it, she found that the box was full of foreign novels, including Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Stendhal's The Red and the Black, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers, Alexandre Dumas' The Lady of the Camellias, Flaubert's Madame Bovary, Tolstoy's Anna Karenina and War and Peace, Turgenev's A Nobleman's Nest, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, etc., all of which were bought by her brother at Wang Fujing bookstore before the Cultural Revolution. Yanbei was overjoyed, like a person who had been hungry for a long time and suddenly encountered a sumptuous banquet. Before this, she felt that her life was like a black-and-white movie played countless times, monotonous, lonely, boring, and closed, just like the number 9 courtyard where she was born and grew up, deep, empty, and gloomy. Yanbei's girlhood was deeply shrouded in this tone, making her personality melancholy and sentimental, like a flower that had not seen the sun for a long time, and the whole person looked weak and pale. When she was 15 or 16 years old, she was less than 1.6 meters tall and as thin as a bean sprout. But with the appearance of these foreign novels, Yanbei felt as if a door had been opened and a vast, rich, colorful, and magical world appeared before her. She read these novels throughout middle school. Among them, The Red and the Black had been read more than once, and many chapters could almost be recited backward, but she was not bored at all and was still as interested as the first time when she reread it. Yanbei was reading The Red and the Black that morning with great concentration. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, dong, dong, dong 1 or 2 times like a woodpecker pecking at a tree. The sound was light, rhythmic, and slightly hesitant. Yanbei raised her eyes from the book and saw a strange young man standing at the gate of the compound. Today, the number 9 courtyard was no longer as heavily guarded as it had been before the Cultural Revolution. Not only had the sentries been removed, but the gates were also no longer closed all day, which made people stay away. Nowadays, it is usually open, and neighbors from the alley occasionally come in to visit. At this moment, one of the 2 red-painted courtyard doors was closed, and the other was open. The strange young man was standing at the open door. He was very tall, about 1.85 meters tall, and his head almost touched the doorframe, which reminded Yanbei of the phrase, standing tall and upright. Although the weather was hot, he wore a white, long-sleeved shirt and army green pants. The hem of his shirt was tucked into his pants, and he wore a pair of old-looking liberation shoes. His collarbone and sleeves were buttoned with meticulous care. His hair was short and slightly messy, and he carried a faded military satchel on his shoulder. He looked like a veteran who had just retired from the army. "Hello, my name is Chen Yiming. I'm Hong Tai-hung's comrade in arms, and I just came back from Heilongjiang." He saw Yanbei looking at him scrutinizingly, and he smiled politely, revealing 2 rows of neat teeth. "You are Tai-hung's sister, Yanbei, right? He told me about you." As he spoke, he lifted his legs, stepped over the high threshold, and walked towards the yard. Yanbei found that his legs were long, reminding him of a long-legged bird, such as a heron. She stood up from the recliner involuntarily and looked him up and down. "Chen, Yiming? After my brother's legs were numb from the cold in the snow, you carried him for dozens of miles at night to take him to the hospital?" "Yes. If he had been sent to the hospital later that day, his legs would have been completely scrapped, Chen Yiming said, as he walked in front of Yanbei, his eyes falling on the book in her hand. "Oh, are you reading? Let me guess. What book are you reading?" When Yanbei heard this, she subconsciously hid the book behind her. The book was open, and its cover was not visible. Yanbei didn't think he could guess which book she was reading. "You are reading The Red and the Black, published by the People's Literature Publishing House in 1956. Yanbei was surprised when he heard Chen Yiming recite the book's title word for word, including the publisher and publication date. "How did you know?" "Haha, I can smell the smell of books." Chen Yiming winked, then paused and recited. At 9 o'clock the next day, Julian came down from the cell and went to the court hall. The yard was crowded with people, and the gendarmes had a hard time making their way through the crowd. Julian slept well at night. He was very calm and had no other feelings except a wise pity for this group of jealous people. This group of jealous people was not cruel, and they would applaud his death sentence. He was forced to stay in the crowd for more than a quarter of an hour, and he had to admit that his appearance aroused a kind of cordial sympathy in the public, which surprised him. He didn't hear a single unpleasant word. "These outsiders are not as bad as I thought in the past," he said. Walking into the courtroom, he was amazed by the elegance of the building. This is pure Gothic, featuring many beautiful small columns that are carefully chiseled out of stone. He felt like he was in England. Chapter 41 of Volume 2, Trial. "You are reading this paragraph, right?" Yanbei was stunned, as if she had seen a god descend from heaven. Her hand loosened, and the copy of The Red and the Black fell to the ground. "Oh my God, you are so amazing!" "How could I be so great?" Chen Yiming smiled, bent down to pick up the book, flicked the dust off it, and handed it back to Yanbei, saying, "To tell you the truth, when your brother bought this book at Wangfujing bookstore, I also bought a copy. I was still in junior high school at the time and took it with me when I went to the countryside to work on the production team. I have read it at least 10 times now. I can recite most of the book." "Really? Your corps soldiers also enjoy reading bourgeois novels, such as The Red and the Black." Yanbei didn't quite believe it and asked with emphasis on the words, "corps soldiers." "Are the soldiers of the corps also human beings?" Chen Yiming said, as if instructing his students. Although Stendhal is a bourgeois writer, he exposed and criticized the corruption and meanness of the feudal aristocracy and the bourgeoisie through Julian's fate, telling us that the road of individual struggle is not feasible. The only way out for young people is to unite with the broad proletariat and overthrow the reactionary rule of the bourgeoisie. Julian unites with the broad masses of the proletariat. Is this possible? Yanbei raised his question cautiously. Of course. With Julian's personality, if he were in Italy in the 1830s or Soviet Russia in the early 20th century, he could easily have become the Gadfly or Pavel Korchagin. If he were in China in the 1920s and 1930s, he might have become Jue Hui and Lin Daojing, Chen Yiming said in an affirmative tone and waved his hand vigorously, as if he was giving a speech in front of many people, his eyes shining, his 2 thick black eyebrows slightly raised, his angular face revealing a firm and confident expression. He looked so handsome and rugged. Yanbei even saw a scar on his right cheek, probably due to frostbite. For a moment she seemed to smell a wild breath coming from the great northern wilderness. The Gadfly, Pavel Korchagin, Jue Hui, and Lin Daojing were characters in the novels The Gadfly, How the Steel Was Tempered, Family, and Song of Youth, which Yanbei had read long ago. But it was the first time for her to hear people link the protagonists of these novels about revolutionaries with Julian. She felt very strange. To be precise, the person in front of her made her feel weird. She even felt that Chen Yiming was not a real person but came from a fantasy world. By the way, Tai Hong heard that Uncle Hong's gunshot wound had recurred, so he asked me to bring back 2 bear paws. These things can strengthen muscles and bones. Chen Yiming took out a small package from his bag and said, Last winter, Tai Hong took me and a few comrades to kill a bear in the old forest. It weighed over 200 kilograms and provided the whole regiment with a sumptuous New Year's dinner. "When will my brother come back?" Yanbei asked after taking the package. "He is the head of the group and is very busy with work. He can't spare the time to come back." "Are you back to visit your relatives?" Yanbei asked. "By the way, I just knitted a sweater for my brother. When you go back, please give it to him." "I'm not going back. I was recommended to Peking University and returned to study this time." Chen Yiming shook his head, looked at Yanbei, hesitated for a moment, and said, "There is only one quota for workers, peasants, and soldiers in the regiment this time. The division headquarters was originally going to give it to your brother, but he gave it to me." Yanbei let out a soft, "Oh," not knowing what to say. Later, Chen Yiming said goodbye. Yanbei sent him out of number 9 courtyard. When they reached the gate, Chen Yiming remembered something, took a book out of his bag, and handed it to Yanbei. "You like to read novels. This book, Iron Tornado, was written by a comrade in our corps. It's all about the life your brother and I have experienced. I'll give it to you." After saying that, he lifted a lock of hair from his forehead, took 2 long legs, and strode out of Bingma Hutong. Yanbei held the gate and watched Chen Yiming's tall figure disappear at the alley entrance. Then she looked away and stared at the book cover in her hand. Blue sky, white clouds, green grassland, and 2 red guards in green military uniforms riding horses. From that day on, the shadow of Chen Yiming was deeply engraved in Yanbei's heart. To be precise, she fell in love with Chen Yiming. This was the first time that Yanbei had had such feelings for the opposite sex since she was a child. She turned the pages of the novel Iron Tornado to pieces and read it countless times. Although Yanbei was unfamiliar with the story in the book, she felt an indescribable sense of intimacy when she thought about her brother and Chen Yiming living in such a way. In particular, there was a plot in the novel where the protagonist, Chang Xiaobing, and his educated youth comrades guarded the border in the ice and snow at temperatures of more than 30 degrees below zero, an experience similar to that of her brother and Chen Yiming. The protagonist, Chang Xiaobing, also seemed to have the shadows of both her brother and Chen Yiming. She was just a little unsure who he was more like. For a while, Yanbei was consumed by an almost obsessive trance, unable to sleep or eat, as the shadow of Chen Yiming lingered in her mind, and she began to lose weight. Since the Cultural Revolution, hiring a nanny has been criticized as a bourgeois lifestyle, and many senior cadres in the army fired their nannies at home. Her father also asked Niuniu to return to her hometown in Shanxi. Niuniu had brought up Yanbei since she was a child, and they had already established a relationship that was not mother and daughter, but something better than that. When Niuniu left number 9 courtyard, they hugged each other and cried bitterly, unable to part. Once, Niuniu came to see Yanbei from her hometown in Shanxi. When she saw her, she screamed in surprise. "Oh, Bei, why are you so thin? Are you sick?" She forced her to see a doctor. The result of going to the hospital was that there was no disease. But Niuniu was still worried. To nourish Yanbei's body, she mixed the buckwheat noodles she brought with lean meat to make porridge for her every day. The bag of buckwheat noodles was given to her father. Her father loved to eat the buckwheat dumplings made by Niuniu. After Niuniu had left, his old stomach problems returned because he could not eat the buckwheat dumplings. Niuniu had initially planned to stay for only 2 days before returning to Shanxi. Still, she waited for more than half a month, preparing delicious food for Yanbei and her father every day until her thin face became round and her father's old stomach problems improved. Niuniu had no idea that Yanbei was actually suffering from a case of lovesickness. This kind of sickness could not be cured by anyone except that flashed, long-legged boy. But Chen Yiming never appeared again after he came to courtyard number 9, just like a shooting star flashing across the night sky. Apart from the novel Iron Tornado that she had read to pieces, no trace of him was left. Yanbei had wanted to write a letter to Chen Yiming for a while, but she only knew that Chen Yiming was studying at Peking University, and she had no idea what department or major he was in. Peking University was so big. How could the letter be sent there? She also wanted to write a letter to her brother, who was far away in the great northern wilderness, to inquire about Chen Yiming's specific address. Still, she hesitated again and couldn't muster up the courage. She was still a middle school student, and a girl's shyness made her bury the secret deep in her heart. 3. Break up. Ever since her brother moved out of No. 9 Courtyard, Yanbei rarely saw his cronies, including Chen Yiming. It wasn't Yanbei who first called her brother's friends cronies, but her father. It was after they had a major argument. In Yanbei's memory, her brother and father's tense relationship began not long after he started working at the National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC. At that time, her father had been transferred from the Central Military Commission to the Commission for Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense, COSTIND. The father and son were busy with their own affairs during the day and didn't return until late. Yanbei had also been admitted to the Broadcasting Institute, so it was rare for the family of 3 to get together. No. 9. Courtyard was always quiet, like an ancient temple, only coming alive on weekends and holidays. That was when Niuniu would return to No. 9 Courtyard from her hometown in Shanxi. After implementing the household contract responsibility system in the countryside, her family had a few acres of mountain land to cultivate, which old man Guo Maolin could manage on his own. 2 years earlier, when Niuniu appeared at No. 9 Courtyard again with a bag of buckwheat noodles, Yanbei had said to her father, "Dad, you like Auntie Niuniu's buckwheat noodles so much, why don't you just let her stay?" Hong Hu, who had already left his position in the Central Military Commission, still wore his military uniform, but he no longer had the same air of authority as before. He had become kind and amiable, especially in front of his daughter. As a father, he knew that Yanbei had been raised by Niuniu and had always been reluctant to let her go. Over the years, Niuniu had become an integral part of the family, and besides, No. 9 Courtyard did need someone to take care of it. That's how Niuniu stayed. Every weekend, Yanbei, her father, her brother, and Linlan, now her brother's girlfriend, would gather at No. 9 Courtyard, enjoying each other's company in a warm, happy atmosphere as lively as a festival. Niuniu, with a blue cloth apron tied around her waist, bustled in and out like a housewife, trying her best to make them delicious food. She wouldn't stop until she had made 7 large dishes and 8 bowls for each meal. During that period, the relationship between her father and brother was still harmonious. When they were in a good mood, the father and son would share a drink and have a few cups together. The problem arose because of her brother's friends. The salon at No. 9 Courtyard became more and more frequent. It used to be once a month, but now it was shortened to once every 2 weeks or even once a week. The number of people also increased from 7 or 8 to more than 10. In addition to the old faces, many new faces were added, but Chen Yiming was nowhere to be seen. Yanbei couldn't hide her disappointment. These people were not just her brother's classmates and comrades in arms. They had expanded to various industries like a snowball, becoming a small society. The topics they discussed were also much richer than before: culture, politics, economics, military affairs, diplomacy, all kinds of things, all-encompassing. They often argued fiercely, turning No. 9 Courtyard into a place as noisy as that Dazayuan in Bingma Hutong, losing its former tranquility. Once, Yanbei heard Jiang Haiyang pontificating again. When the CCP was founded, it followed the path of the Russians. Now, in carrying out reform, it must follow the path of the Americans. Theoretician, what do you mean by that? Are you trying to completely westernize? A short young man with curly hair and a plaid shirt asked. He was a teacher at the Central Party School and had recently started attending the salon. Don't start throwing labels around. Your way of thinking regarding class struggle is outdated, Jiang Haiyang said dismissively. What does it mean to westernize completely? Isn't Marxism a Western thing? If you're against complete westernization, does that mean you want to oppose Marxism too? The young man with the mustache was speechless. He looked at Hong Tai-hang, sitting on the sofa in the middle, and muttered, "You're changing the subject." Jiang Haiyang was about to retort when Hong Tai-hang asked, in an encouraging tone, explain in detail what it means to follow the path of the Americans. In a nutshell, democratic politics, separation of powers, and a market economy, Zhang Haiyang said without hesitation, waving his hand. As soon as he said this, a buzzing discussion broke out in the room. Someone whispered, "Isn't that a bit too radical?" "Is that your personal view or the view of your State Council Research Office?" "Isn't that asking the Communist Party to step down?" Everyone was talking at once, looking very excited. A middle-aged man with a shaved head and a somewhat gloomy look suddenly said, "A few days ago, I saw a big character poster at Peking University's Triangle Square with the same view. I agree with it, but I doubt whether it's feasible, unless they take down the portrait on Tiananmen Square." This man was a writer named Gu Xiang. In 1957, he had been labeled a rightist because of a novel he wrote, and he had only been rehabilitated a few years earlier. Yanbei had seen his name in a collection of stories called Re-Blooming Flowers. "That's impossible," someone retorted. "Don't forget, Xiaoping explicitly stated in an interview with the Italian journalist Falesi that Mao's portrait on Tiananmen Square will hang there forever." "Yes, I agree with Teacher Gu's view. That's the crux of the matter," Zhang Haiyang said, frowning. "Reform can't succeed as long as Mao's portrait hangs on Tiananmen Square." Before Zhang Haiyang could finish speaking, Yanbei heard a loud thud in the courtyard. She went to the window and looked out. She saw her father looking somber, the pruning shears in his hand dropped on the ground by the base of the wall. Niuniu was helping to gather the pruned grape branches and leaves. As before, her father would tend to his vineyard on weekends or holidays. Clearly, her father had heard everything that had been said in the room. Yanbei's heart suddenly sank. That night, her father had Yanbei call her brother Tai Heng to his office-cum-bedroom in the front courtyard for a talk. Since her brother had returned to the city from the great northern wilderness, her father rarely spoke to him so seriously. Although the door was closed, Yanbei could still hear her father shouting at the top of his voice. "Comrade Xiaoping has long said that without Chairman Mao, the Chinese Revolution might not have succeeded to this day. Without Chairman Mao, there would be no new China. That's not an exaggeration. You bunch of bastards actually want to take down Chairman Mao's portrait from Tiananmen Square? That's clearly rebellion." Her brother was frightened by her father's heavy accusation and said in a low voice, "Dad, I didn't say that. I don't agree with what they said either." Unexpectedly, her father became even angrier and slammed his hand on the table, cursing, "Just because you didn't say it doesn't mean you're not responsible. Didn't you organize this damn salon? Birds of a feather flock together. Isn't this liberalization? If it were 1957, it wouldn't be wrong to label you a Potofi Club." Her brother didn't say anything. Later, her father commanded, "I forbid you to bring your cronies into number 9 courtyard again. Otherwise, I'll kick you out too." The door opened, and her brother walked out of the room, his face red as if his father had slapped him, his expression dejected. Yanbei knew that the person her father admired most was Chairman Mao. In his office-cum-bedroom in the front courtyard, 2 photos were hanging. One was a group photo of her father and mother taken when they first entered the city after the liberation, and the other, a large picture hanging on the wall opposite his desk, was a photo of her father and Chairman Mao inspecting the troops together. When she was little, Yanbei had heard her father recall more than once that when Chairman Mao led the autumn harvest uprising troops to Sanwan, he was just a cowherd, so poor that he could only wear straw sandals in the dead of winter. After the reorganization in Sanwan, he joined the Red Army with several other poor cowherds from the village. Chairman Mao noticed that his toes, protruding from his straw sandals, were frozen red and swollen, resembling carrots, so he asked the guards nearby to bring him a pair of cloth shoes and hand them to him. From then on, he followed Chairman Mao in the revolution, from the 25,000 LE Long March to the anti-Japanese War and the War of Liberation, all the way to the establishment of New China. During the Cultural Revolution, although her father was implicated as an old subordinate of Lin Biao and was suspended from his duties and idled at home for several years. His position was never promoted after his reinstatement, and his loyalty and respect for Chairman Mao never wavered. This time, her brother and his cronies had really angered her father. For several days in a row, the father and son didn't speak to each other. However, later her father and brother truly broke up. By then, Hong Tai-hong had passed the brief period of maladjustment after returning to the city. Not only was he successful in his work, but he had also quickly established a social circle centered on him based on his past classmates and comrades in arms. Hong Tai-hang had been a regimental commander in the Production and Construction Corps and originally possessed excellent organizational skills and a keen political eye. Now, he had transformed from a former Red Guard and Production and Construction Corps soldier into a pioneer who waved the flag for reform. After a long revolution, the word reform had a magical attraction and appeal for every Chinese person. Having experienced the Cultural Revolution, Hong Tai-hong and his friends knew how to seize the new initiative of political correctness and become trendsetters in the new era. Trendsetters was another name for reformers in that period, just as conservative and backward and ideologically rigid were negative words that opposed reform. They seemed to regard themselves as the defenders of reform, just as they had regarded themselves as successors to the cause of proletarian revolution during the Cultural Revolution, and often made high-sounding pronouncements such as, "Corruption is the lubricant of reform," "High salaries foster integrity," and "Small government, big society." "Heaven punishes those who are not for themselves" had become their new philosophy of life. Due to their prominent family backgrounds, they almost all held positions in important party and government departments and fields, and in the eyes of ordinary people, they were truly social elites. In an era centered on economic construction, this kind of identity was by no means an empty thing. Still, like a commodity, it had a material property that could be exchanged at any time. Hong Tai-hong naturally understood this principle and did not hesitate to look for every possible opportunity to realize it. Before long, he went from being penniless when he first returned to the city to being wealthy and powerful, secretly buying a 3-bedroom apartment outside Fuxing Menwai Avenue. It was one of the first batches of commercial housing built in Beijing after the reform and opening up, and it was snapped up as soon as it went on sale. After Hong Tai-hang received the house keys, he didn't tell his father but only informed his sister, Yanbei. "Brother, where did you get so much money?" She looked at the shiny keys in her brother's hand, her eyes widening in surprise. "Silly sister, do you think I got this chair of the department director in the NDRC for nothing?" Hong Tai-hung smiled mysteriously. "And Dad's status is worth 100 times more than my little department director." Yanbei seemed to understand something, but was also secretly worried about her brother. Hong Tai-hong seemed to have guessed her thoughts and instructed, "Bebe, you must never tell Dad about the house. Although buying commercial housing is no longer uncommon among cadres of central government agencies, the old man is too conservative. He can't wrap his head around it." In her brother's mind, her father had long been classified as one of those ideologically rigid people. Yanbei had heard him complain more than once. "Dad is increasingly out of touch with this era. In this respect, he's not even as good as Uncle Song." The Uncle Song that Hong Tai-hang was referring to was Song Chiang-kun, the younger cousin of their mother, Han Ying. Uncle had joined the revolution with their mother when he was 15 years old and later followed their father in the South-North campaign, fighting the Japanese devils and engaging in underground work, so he could be considered an old revolutionary who had been tested for a long time. After the liberation, Uncle Song worked in Dongjiang province for a long time. When he came to Beijing for meetings or on business trips, he would visit their father and mother no matter how busy he was. When Yanbei was little, Uncle would bring her and Tai-hang 2 boxes of sesame candy and Hong Kong cakes, all local specialties of Dongjiang, which were incredibly delicious. Therefore, she had a good impression of Uncle. She thought that Uncle was not only handsome and stylish, but also very kind and gentle, and he was both literary and martial. In the 1950s, he also published a full-length novel called The Majestic Song of the Great River, which was praised by central leaders, who praised him as a talented man in the party. Yanbei had heard all these things about Uncle from her brother. Her brother said that Uncle was very talented among the senior cadres of the Communist Party, and his thinking was also very enlightening, but like Mom, he was unlucky. Her brother said, "Do you know how Mom joined the revolution back then?" Yanbei shook her head. "Zongda," her brother said softly, uttering an unfamiliar name. "Mom joined the Communist Party under this person's guidance, but this person later defected to the Kuomintang and became a famous traitor in the history of the CCP. Mom was also implicated by Zongda. After the liberation, she was always a bureau-level cadre. Female cadres with the same qualifications as her were already at the provincial and ministerial levels. Uncle Song Chiang-kun worked under Zongda and was later implicated. He was also labeled a traitor during the Cultural Revolution and spent several years in prison. After the downfall of the Gang of Four, Uncle Song implemented sweeping reforms in Dongjiang province, and his efforts were highly successful. He was praised as an enlightened figure in the party. It is said that the premier personally praised him. Still, he not only stayed in the deputy provincial level position for more than 20 years without moving, but was also given a demerit when he retired. Don't you think it's unfair? When Hong Taihong said these words, he spoke with great conviction, as if speaking out against injustice on behalf of his mother and uncle, which made Yanbei believe him. Her brother had a wealth of experience, read many books, and worked in a department directly under the state council, so he naturally knew more than Yanbei. He often shared various inside stories and high-level secrets with his friends, speaking confidently. Yanbei seemed to understand something. No wonder her brother was so warm to Uncle every time he came, and they chatted so enthusiastically while her father was left aside, having to tend to his vineyard in the courtyard. Yanbei vaguely felt that the relationship between her brother and father was becoming increasingly tense, and she couldn't help but feel a little worried, especially after she learned that her brother had secretly formed a company with a few friends behind her father's back and used the money he earned to buy a commercial house. Many foreign goods poured into the country during that period, and the import and export trade was booming. The NDRC controlled the approval rights for imported goods, and her brother used the power at his disposal to obtain numerous benefits. The company he and his friends registered was a money-laundering financial platform, seemingly operating legally, but in reality, it was a typical act of using power for personal gain. Furthermore, they also exploited national policies and price differences to resell military supplies. At that time, her brother had just married Lin Lan, and before the honeymoon period was over, something happened. After hearing about her brother's affairs, her father's blood pressure suddenly soared to 180, and he was rushed to the hospital, where he was put on an IV drip for 2 days. After returning to number 9 Courtyard, he was sullen and didn't even respond when Yanbei and Niuniu spoke to him. Depending on the severity of the matter, her brother was originally going to be sentenced, but Yanbei and her sister-in-law, Lin Lan, repeatedly pleaded with her father to intercede for her brother, and also because her brother had suffered a mental breakdown after the incident. His old, cold legs, which he had injured in the production and construction corps, relapsed, and he suddenly became paralyzed. Ultimately, her brother was spared criminal liability, and he was only demoted and sent home. But he didn't return to the home in number 9 Courtyard. Instead, he moved into the commercial house outside Fuxing Menwai. This was her father's decision, made in exchange for Yanbei and Lin Lan's intercession on her brother's behalf. 4. Love cannot be expressed in words. Yanbei's trip to the Mian Reservoir was indeed motivated by Chen Yiming. Since her brother moved to his new home outside Fushingmen, the Ceylon had scattered like birds and beasts, never reappearing at number 9 Courtyard. That included Chen Yiming. One New Year's Eve, after Yanbei and Niuniu begged and pleaded repeatedly, her father finally agreed to let her brother and sister-in-law, Lin Lan, return to number 9 Courtyard for a family reunion dinner. After dinner that day, Yanbei pushed her brother around the courtyard in his wheelchair and quietly asked, "Is your salon still going on?" "Don't beat around the bush," You want to know about Chen Yiming, right? Hong Tai-hung saw through her immediately. You knew all along, and you still ask? Yanbei's face flushed, and she pouted. Have you seen him recently? Yiming has been assigned to C County for a temporary post, Hong Tai-hung said casually. When will he be back? Yanbei asked quickly. Is your salon still active? He'll attend when he returns to Beijing, right? Hong Tai-hung sat in his wheelchair, saying not a word. After a long while, he turned around, looked at her seriously, and said gravely, Bebe, I've known for a long time that you have feelings for Chen Yiming. The reason I haven't mentioned it to you is because I was afraid of hurting you. He turned his head away, his back to Yanbei, paused, and said slowly, You're my sister, and you're about to graduate from college. It's not that I don't care about your personal affairs, but I advise you to give up on Yiming. Yanbei hesitated, puzzled, and asked, Why? Because Yiming is already married, Hong Tai-hung said, emphasizing each word. His wife is a Zhiqing, educated youth, who went to the Great Northern Wilderness with us. Her name is Cui Manli, and she was Yiming's classmate in middle school. They got married in the Great Northern Wilderness. I even officiated their wedding. Her brother's voice was very soft, but Yanbei felt as if a loud slap in the face had struck her. Stars flashed before her eyes, and she stood there dumbfounded. Chen Yiming's heroic and handsome face flashed through her mind like a star in the night sky. She left her brother alone in the courtyard, ran back to her bedroom, closed the door, covered her face with the blanket, and cried her heart out on the bed. Yanbei felt she had said goodbye to her girlhood from that day on, but she didn't forget Chen Yiming. He was the only person she had ever loved in her youth. Love cannot be forgotten. This was the title of a novel Yanbei had read. Time flew by like an arrow, and years passed. Yanbei was almost 30 years old in the blink of an eye. During this time, her sister-in-law Lin Lan introduced her to several potential partners, but she didn't like any of them. She couldn't forget Chen Yiming. As long as she heard his name or news about him, her face would flush, and her heart would beat faster, like a young girl in love, even though she knew in her heart that this feeling was hopeless, and perhaps Chen Yiming himself didn't even know. But Yanbei couldn't restrain herself. Therefore, when she heard that Chen Yiming might be going to Miyun, the emotions in her heart erupted like a long-suppressed volcano. Without hesitation, she put aside her work and accompanied her brother to the Miyun Reservoir. Yanbei was no stranger to the Miyun Reservoir. In middle school, the school implemented an open-door policy. She went to the Miyun Reservoir with her classmates to participate in labor, planting 3 pine trees on the hillside near the dam. More than a decade had passed. Those 3 small pine trees should have grown into towering trees by now. On the way to the Miyun Reservoir with her brother, Yanbei felt a little excited. Was it because she would see the 3 pine trees she had planted with her hands, or would she be able to see Chen Yiming soon? She couldn't say for sure. Even when the military jeep drove into the large mansion by the reservoir, Yanbei wondered if Chen Yiming had really come. Yanbei had known for a long time that her brother had built a mansion at the Miyun Reservoir. After suffering the double blow of being dismissed from his position and becoming paralyzed in both legs, Hong Tai-hung was depressed for a while, but he soon recovered. Although he no longer worked at the NDRC, his connections remained, especially the circle formed around that salon, which kept him in close contact with society in all directions. After leaving his job, he was no longer constrained by his position and became even more complimentary. More people sought him out to get things done than before. Of course, he didn't need to do many things himself, he just needed to write a note. Sometimes, when his father's subordinates were turned down by his father, they would go to him and get things done smoothly. At that time, her father had already retired and no longer inquired about work matters, refusing to see anyone who came to him for help. Since then, Hong Tai-hung has imperceptibly woven his father's social connections into his own magical network of relationships, and he did all of this behind his father's back. Yanbei was aware of her brother's actions, including the large mansion by the reservoir. Several years earlier, she had heard that someone had helped her brother build an enormous mansion by the Niuniu Reservoir. That person was a former subordinate of her father, Liu Jiming, who was the director of a military factory in Niuniu. He used to visit her father at No. 9 Courtyard every year, but after her father retired, Liu Jiming came less frequently. Yanbei didn't expect Director Liu to have connected with her brother and even built a large mansion for him by the Niuniu Reservoir. The mansion was situated on the south side of the Niuniu Reservoir, nestled against the mountains and overlooking the water, offering stunning scenery. The entire mansion covered dozens of acres, with 3 courtyards in front and behind. The layout and style were almost like a mold taken from No. 9 Courtyard, with a strong shamanistic style, including the rounded ceilings and the 2 stone dogs at the door, the size and shape of which were very similar to the pair of stone dogs at the entrance of No. 9 Courtyard. Next to the courtyard by the reservoir was a vineyard, precisely the same as the vineyard in No. 9 Courtyard that her father tended every day after he retired. Yanbei toured the mansion from front to back and inside and out. Looking at this familiar mansion, she was utterly stunned and couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh my God, it's like the entire house has been copied." Hong Tai-hang laughed triumphantly. "The old man kicked me out of the house. Wouldn't I just create a No. 9 Courtyard for myself?" Yanbei sensed a hint of revenge in his laughter. It seemed that her brother was still complaining about her father. Thinking this, a shadow couldn't help but flash through her mind. Hong Tai-hang's friends hadn't arrived yet. The mansion was empty. Besides the Tai-hang and Yanbei siblings, Aunt Wu, who was hired to look after the mansion, and her old partner. Aunt Wu was in her 50s, dressed neatly and cleanly, and looked shrewd and capable. Her old partner was dressed like a local farmer and appeared to be an honest and simple one. Director Liu hired them to take care of the mansion. Aunt Wu used to work as a nanny in Beijing and is a good cook. Her old partner is also an honest man. I feel at ease leaving the mansion to them. Hong Tai-hang sat in his wheelchair, gazing at the magnificent mansion, and nodded with satisfaction, his expression and tone reminiscent of a landlord in a movie. "Brother, how much did such a big mansion cost?" Yanbei couldn't help but ask. "The workers and the materials for building the mansion were all local," Tai-hang said casually. "Actually, it didn't cost that much. Director Liu copied No. 9 Courtyard so realistically, that alone took a lot of effort." Yanbei rolled her eyes at her brother, looking indignant on behalf of Director Liu. "I don't understand what he's trying to gain." "Gain what?" A cryptic smile appeared on the corner of Hong Tai-hang's mouth. "If it weren't for the old man, could he have become the director of Factory 6803? If I hadn't helped him smooth things over, could he have stayed in the director's position until now?" Yanbei thought of the group of her brother's friends at the No. 9 Courtyard salon again, as well as the intricate network of relationships behind her brother. Did this network include Chen Yimeng? Thinking this, Yanbei's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Would he really come today? But she didn't ask her brother. She was no longer the young girl she had been more than a decade ago, and her brother was no longer the production and construction corps soldier who had just returned to the city from the great northern wilderness. Chen Yimeng was no longer the worker-peasant soldier student who had recited the red and the black at their first meeting and given her the iron tornado. Not long ago, Yanbei had seen an interview in the newspaper, a rising star in the political arena. An interview with Chen Yimeng, secretary of the C County Party Committee. She suddenly remembered the 3 small pine trees she had planted at the Niuniu Reservoir back then. What did they look like now? Although there were only the Tai-hang and Yanbei siblings for lunch, a table was set with a full array of dishes. One of the main dishes was steamed reservoir fish, a specialty of the Niuniu Reservoir, characterized by tender flesh and a fresh taste and not easily found in Beijing. The siblings ate and praised Aunt Wu's excellent cooking skills. Having been in the car all morning, her brother was a little tired. After lunch, he went back to his bedroom for a nap. His cronies wouldn't arrive until the afternoon. "Bei, when Director Liu comes, wake me up. Old Liu put a lot of effort into this mansion." Before returning to his bedroom, Tai-hang instructed Yanbei, She hummed in agreement. Chen Yiming and them, when will they arrive? Her brother stammered, Oh, they're still early. What's wrong? Can't you wait? His tone was a little ambiguous and a little perfunctory. After saying that, he wheeled himself back to his bedroom. The wheelchair was also a gift from Lu Shengping, made of a unique stainless steel material, resembling a miniature armored vehicle. Aunt Wu and her partner finished clearing the table and were busy preparing the dinner ingredients in the kitchen. Yanbei wasn't tired at all, so she took out a book. Passing by the vineyard, she saw that bunches of grapes had already grown on the grapevines, each one only the size of a pearl, exquisite and translucent, crystal clear. Yanbei remembered the vineyard in No. 9 Courtyard that her father tended every day after he retired. Grapes hadn't grown yet. It seemed that the season at the Niuniu Reservoir was more than a day or two ahead of schedule compared to Beijing. Crossing the vineyard, she reached the lawn by the water's edge. There were a few plastic chairs and a parasol in the center of the lawn. When she first entered the mansion, Yanbei had rested there with her brother for a while. The lawn was located on high ground. Sitting here, you could see the entire view of the reservoir. It was an excellent viewing platform. It was noon. The sun was shining, and the gentle breeze caressed her face. The Niuniu Reservoir was like a vast bronze mirror, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds above, as well as the surrounding peaks. For a moment, Yanbei felt as though she had become a flower, a tree, or a spot of light in this bronze mirror, as if she were in another world. She opened the book. It was a novel called New Star. Her brother had first recommended this novel to her. Our young protagonist, Li Xiangnian, accompanied by a thin, hunchbacked old man guarding the tower, stepped into the red-lacquered gate. A humid, musty smell of wood wafted towards him. This tower housed the historical relics unearthed and circulated in Guling County. It was the small museum of Guling County. This was the first floor. Animal fossils from tens of millions of years ago were displayed on the red velvet in the glass cabinets, rhinoceros horns, teeth, and bones of ferocious beasts. How distant! The opening description reminded Yanbei of Victor Hugo's Notre Dame de Paris, and the shadow of the protagonist, Li Xiangnian, was deeply etched in her mind from then on. Li Xiangnian was a reformer, young, handsome, daring to think and act, and had an extraordinary temperament that made Yanbei think involuntarily of someone. Once, her brother asked her, "Do you know the prototype of the character Li Xiangnian?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Who?" her brother said. "Chen Yiming." As if someone had guessed a little secret, Yanbei's face flushed. Sure enough, she was thinking the same thing. They were all children of high-ranking cadres who had been sent down from Beijing to serve as county party secretaries. It was too much of a coincidence. From then on, Yanbei always carried New Star with her, taking it out to read a few pages whenever she had time. The pages were tattered. After the movie adaptation of New Star was released, Yanbei watched it twice. She watched the second showing with her brother. However, she didn't like the actor Zhou Lijing, who played Li Xiangnian. She felt that Zhou Lijing's temperament was too different from Li Xiangnian's. It would have been better if Chen Yiming had played it. She said this to her brother when she exited the movie theater. Her brother turned his face from the wheelchair and looked at her. "Bei, you're obsessed." The tone was more like heartache than blame. Yanbei herself felt it was a bit absurd. After publishing the sequel to New Star, Night and Day, she bought a copy at Wang Fujing bookstore at the first opportunity. Now, she was reading it for the second time. Yanbei was sitting in the plastic chair, engrossed in New Star, when she heard a soft footstep. She moved her gaze from the book, looked up, and saw a tall figure walking from the vineyard toward the water's edge. Yanbei's eyesight was already poor. After reading for a while, her vision was even more blurred. Dimly thought that the figure was very similar to Chen Yiming, whom she had longed to see for so long, but hadn't seen in a long time. That tall and straight figure that always had slightly messy hair was so similar. In an instant, Yanbei's heart was like a frozen lake that had been frozen for too long, suddenly thawed by a massive amount of heat. The ice blocks shattered and melted in her body, bursting out from the inside out with a strong impulse. She involuntarily stood up from the plastic chair, walked towards the person, and stretched her arms as if to embrace the other person. You're finally here," she murmured in an almost reproachful tone. But at this moment, Yanbei saw the person clearly. It wasn't Chen Yiming, but a young man with the exact tall and straight figure as Chen Yiming, but much younger. The young man stood on the lawn, looking at Yanbei with some surprise. He had slightly curly hair, not permed but the kind of natural curls. His forehead was slightly protruding, his eye sockets were deep set, his cheekbones were high, and his chin was somewhat upturned, resembling Fei Xiang, a Taiwanese singer who had gained popularity in mainland China in recent years. "Who are you?" Yanbei looked at the young man, who was even younger than herself, with surprise and suspicion, and asked, as if she were angry, "Why were you peeking on me?" "I wasn't peeking on you," the young man stammered, blushing as if he wanted to run away. At that moment, Yanbei woke up completely. She stopped the strange young man and chuckled. "I guess you came with Director Liu, right? Secretary or driver?" "Let's just say that—" The young man lowered his eyelids and answered vaguely. "What do you mean? Let's just say that?" Yanbei seemed to be deliberately teasing him and asked again. "I know old Liu's original secretary. This is the first time I've seen you. Are you a newly assigned college student?" "Yes." The young man was no longer as nervous as he had been before. He looked up at Yanbei and asked boldly, "Are you Yanbei?" "How do you know my name?" Yanbei widened her eyes in surprise but immediately realized and said, "Did old Liu tell you? That's not fair. You haven't told me your name yet." "My name is Ba Dong." "Ba Dong, then we're acquainted." Yanbei heard that the young man had a heavy southern accent. She held out her hand. Ba Dong hesitated for a moment and then reached out his hand and shook Yanbei's hand. Yanbei felt that his hand was very strong, like a real man's hand. Had she shaken hands with Chen Yiming? Yanbei couldn't remember and casually asked, "What did my brother and old Liu talk about?" "I don't know. I came out as soon as they started talking," Ba Dong replied cautiously. "Old Liu is not a simple man. He's a reformer who saved a 6803 factory that was about to go bankrupt." Yanbei said, "I heard my brother say that he has a group of talented salespeople who sell your factory's Hurricane motorcycles all over the country." Ba Dong hummed, looking a little restrained. Yanbei turned around, picked up the book she had been reading from the lounge chair, showed the cover, and asked, "New Star, have you read it?" Ba Dong stammered for a moment and said, "I haven't read it, but I've read the sequel to this book, Night and Day. Director Liu gave it to me. The protagonist's name is Li Xiangnan, and he's a county party secretary." Yes, the secretary of Guling County." Yanbei seemed to have found a kindred spirit. She asked him to sit down in the chair and struck a pose as if she were about to have a long conversation. "Do you like the character, Li Xiangnan? He didn't back down even when he encountered so much resistance in Guling City. He's a real man, like Santiago in Hemingway's writing. Have you read The Old Man and the Sea?" Ba Dong shook his head, but Yanbei didn't care and continued, "Li Xiangnan is my latest favorite novel character. The year before last, after New Star was adapted into a movie, I watched it 3 times in a row," she said, suddenly asking, "By the way, who do you like more, Lin Hong or Gu Xiaoli?" Ba Dong scratched the back of his head, looking as nervous as a student facing a teacher's question. Sweat poured on his forehead and he stammered, unable to answer a single word. Yanbei didn't seem to expect him to answer. She said to herself, "They're both idealists in love, but Lin Hong as a woman is too unfortunate. The misfortune of the times and personal misfortune are all on her shoulders, lending a tragic tone to her character. I feel more sympathy for her. As for Gu Xiaoli," she hugged the thick New Star to her chest, tilted her head, and thought momentarily. "She has a straightforward personality and dares to love and hate. She doesn't have as many emotional burdens as Lin Hong, and she is politically savvy. In every way, she's too well matched with Li Xiangnan. I like her stubbornness when she pursues Li Xiangnian. In this respect, she's a bit like me." The last sentence, she almost muttered to herself, looking at the distant reservoir, her eyes a little misty. Badong seemed to understand and not understand Yanbei's words, with a blank look. Yanbei withdrew her gaze, turned to Badong's face, and suddenly chuckled, saying, "Guess who I almost mistook you for just now?" "Who?" "You don't know him," Yanbei giggled. "I won't tell you." Badong obviously didn't know why she was laughing. Thinking that he had said something wrong, his face turned red like a big girl's. Yanbei stared at Badong intently, thinking, he's really handsome, even more attractive than Chen Yiming. Chapter 5. 1. Hurricane Building. One autumn afternoon, 10 years later, Badong came down from the 13th floor of Hurricane Plaza. Just as he stepped out of the elevator, his Motorola mobile phone rang in his pocket. Walking out, he pulled out his phone and pressed the answer button without checking the caller ID. A familiar voice sounded in his ear. "Old Liu. Liu Shengping has run into trouble. Come see me right away." The voice was deep, with an unmistakable air of command. Badong's heart skipped a beat. He quickly asked, "Big brother, are you in Miyun?" But the other party hung up the phone as if he hadn't heard. Listening to the beeping in his ear, Badong stood stunned for a moment before walking out of the building. The call was from Hong Tai-hung. Since marrying Yanbei, Badong had always addressed Hong Tai-hung as Big Brother, as his wife did. Liu Shengping was not only Badong's old boss, but also his and Yanbei's marriage officiant. And now, old Liu had run into trouble. Actually, Badong had heard about the investigation into Liu Shengping from Hong Tai-hung 6 months ago. Since Factory 6803 was restructured into Hurricane Group, complaints against Chairman Liu Shengping had never ceased, mainly from a group of retired or laid-off cadres and workers from the original Factory 6803. At its worst, they blocked the entrance to Hurricane Group and organized hundreds of people to stage a sit-down protest at the Kostin and petitioning offices. In the end, Hong Tai-hung smoothed things over by pulling strings. Of course, this was not only due to the personal friendship between Hong Tai-hung and Liu Shengping, but also because he had become a major shareholder in Hurricane Investment Company Limited. Hurricane Investment was initially a subsidiary of Hurricane Group, established with the full support of Hong Tai-hung. Everything was thanks to him, from capital operations to obtaining a business license. The condition Hong Tai-hung stipulated for his help was that Badong would serve as the general manager of Hurricane Investment. At that time, Badong was just 26 years old, a small-time salesman at Factory 6803, and had been married to Hong Tai-hung's sister Yanbei for less than a year. Badong knew what Liu Shengping's trouble meant for the Hurricane Group. Fortunately, with Hong Tai-hung's support 6 months ago, he had begun restructuring Hurricane Investment's equity, successfully separating the company's assets from those of the Hurricane Group. Now, Hurricane Investment was a completely independent joint stock company with no affiliation to Hurricane Group. If it weren't for this, Liu Shengping's trouble would have had a disastrous impact on Hurricane Investment. Thinking of this, Badong felt a surge of relief. Badong usually entered and exited Hurricane Plaza from the -1 floor, garage, and went directly to the 13th floor, or from the 13th floor directly to the -1 floor garage. That afternoon, Badong had originally planned to attend a class at Peking University. He was studying for an MBA at Peking University, and he always took the subway to classes on Friday and Saturday afternoons, as well as Sunday afternoons, never using the company's car. For this, his brother-in-law, Hong Tai-hung, had praised him publicly on more than one occasion. But today, Hong Tai-hung's call forced him to cancel his plan to the class. Obeying Big Brother in everything was a habit Badong had developed since marrying Yanbei. Badong immediately called his driver, Xiao Ma, and asked him to drive the car to the entrance of Hurricane Plaza. Xiao Ma had just taken a client to the capital airport and was probably returning now. Badong stood waiting for his driver, Xiao Ma, at the entrance of Hurricane Plaza, idly surveying the lobby. This 21-story building housed dozens of companies, with hundreds and thousands of employees working inside. During rush hour, the elevator entrances and the lobby on the first floor were crowded and packed. Now, it wasn't rush hour, and few people were entering and exiting the lobby, which seemed a little empty. Yes, the lobby was less than 300 square meters, and two circular columns in the middle cut a good hole into several parts, making the entire lobby seem a little cramped. Fortunately, the lobby's ceiling was relatively high, so it didn't feel oppressive. During the renovation, Ba Dong followed his brother-in-law Hong Tai-hung's suggestion to use white marble for the floor, and the ceiling featured a large mural titled Celestial Niangzu Scattering Flowers, created by a well-known painter in Beijing. This artist painted the mural in the arrival hall of the capital airport. With this design, the somewhat narrow sense of space seemed to be pushed open by an invisible hand. Standing in the lobby and looking down or up, it was as if one were standing between the vast sky and the vast universe. On the wall in front of the lobby was a large calligraphy piece engraved with the words Hurricane Plaza in a bold and vigorous style. It was clearly the work of a famous calligrapher, written live by the renowned calligrapher Chen at the Hurricane Plaza opening ceremony. Like the painter who created the mural on the ceiling, Shen Peng was a well-known figure in the national calligraphy and painting circles. They all gave a face to Hong Tai-hung, and the brother-in-law's magical powers were evident from this. Every step Ba Dong had taken to get to where he was today was inseparable from Hong Tai-hung. The outside light was refracted through the two circular columns in the center of the lobby, painting an irregular geometric pattern of light and dark on the floor where people could be seen. Ba Dong was standing between the two columns. Half of his body was hidden in the shadows, blocked by the columns, while the other half was illuminated by the light, looking exceptionally bright. The whole person seemed divided into two parts, like a Picasso work, giving a strange feeling. Someone came in from the lobby entrance or out of the elevator, saw Ba Dong and quickly nodded, respectfully calling out, "General Manager Ba." Ba Dong hummed casually without even raising his eyelids. He was sending a text message on his phone. "Where are you, big brother?" After a moment, two words popped up on the phone screen. Miyun. Concise like a telegram. His wife, Yanbei, sent it. Ba Dong put his phone back in his pocket, looked at his watch, and walked towards the lobby entrance. Just out of the glass revolving door, dazzling sunlight and a cacophony of noise rushed towards him like a tide, forcing him to squint. He was facing the bustling Shaidan Street. Compared to 10 years ago, Shaidan Street has been significantly widened, and the original cement road has been replaced with asphalt, creating a smooth and clean surface that resembles a dark black satin ribbon. Those uneven stores hung with all kinds of signs and full of old Beijing flavor seemed to have been swept away by a gust of wind and disappeared, replaced by high-rise buildings that were more luxurious and fashionable than the last. Hurricane Plaza was one of them. When it was first completed, it was still one of the tallest buildings in Shaidan, but after only a few years, no fewer than 10 buildings that were taller than it had sprung up. Several multinational corporations, including two well-known foreign banks, also had their headquarters buildings on Shaidan Street. Of course, not just Shaidan, the whole of Beijing was like this. Since China joined the WTO, major global financial institutions and the top 50 companies had established branches in Beijing. From Shaidan to Dongdan, Wangfujing to Hohai, Chang'an Street to Tianmen Street, and Fushingmen to Shijumen, the dense clusters of high-rise buildings were like bamboo shoots after the rain, overwhelming the senses. Especially at night, when the lights came on, those thick and gorgeous buildings looked like diamond mountains, shining brightly in the night sky. Of course, it wasn't just the city that had changed, but the people. 10 years ago, when Ba Dong came to Beijing from Dongjiang province with a shoulder bag full of audio cassettes, wandering through the streets like a headless fly searching for a job, he never imagined becoming the general manager Ba he was today. Indeed, from his appearance and status, Ba Dong was no longer comparable to the college student who had come to Beijing seeking employment 10 years ago, or even to the sales champion who had achieved impressive marketing results when he first arrived at Factory 6803. Now, Ba Dong not only controlled the property rights and property management rights of Hurricane Plaza, one of the earliest commercial office buildings in Shidan, but also served as the general manager of Hurricane Investment Company Limited. A year ago, the equity reform also allowed him to take over the position of chairman at Lu Shengping. The company's investment scope had expanded from motorcycles and automobiles to real estate, the IT industry, as well as securities and insurance. At this moment, Ba Dong was standing at the entrance of Hurricane Plaza. Even without the Pierre Cardin suit specially tailored from abroad and the slicked-back hair neatly combed and greased, his tall stature of 1.8 meters and the shrewd and confident expression on that Fei Xiang face were enough to make everyone who passed by him, whether they knew him or not, look at him with admiration. Ba Dong turned to a small street across the road, Rongxianer Hutong. More than 10 years ago, when he came to Beijing to look for a job, he stayed in a small hotel in this hutong for a few days. Now, that small hotel had long been demolished. Every time he passed by on his way to and from work, Ba Dong's gaze would always intentionally or unintentionally sweep across the small white sign that read, Rongxianer Hutong. The taste in his heart was something only he knew. At this moment, a black Volvo silently stopped before Ba Dong. The driver, Xiao Ma, jumped out of the car. He was a young man with a sun visor hat, a plaid jacket, and a look of cleverness on his face. He circled the car, ran to this side, deftly opened the car door, bent over, and said with a smile, "General Manager Ba, I kept you waiting." Ba Dong didn't say anything but held out a hand, gesturing to Xiao Ma. "Give me the car keys and you go back." "Do you want to drive yourself?" Xiao Ma was stunned. "Where are you going?" "Don't ask so many questions," Ba Dong said impatiently, almost snatching the car keys from Xiao Ma's hand and striding towards the Volvo. While Xiao Ma was still stunned, Ba Dong had already started the Volvo and driven out a short distance. In the rearview mirror, he saw Xiao Ma still standing at the entrance of Hurricane Plaza in a daze. 2. Brother-in-law and elder brother-in-law. On the drive to Miyun, Ba Dong felt uneasy. The Volvo merged onto the North 4th Ring Road at the Sanyuan-Kiao overpass, and after joining the highway to Miyun, the scenery outside the window became colorful. The season had entered autumn, the best time of year in Beijing. The persistent sandstorms had disappeared, the air was clear, and the sky was high and cloudless. The forests on both sides of the road were layered one over the other, stretching endlessly. The white birch trees nearby resembled handsome, slender young men, and the maple trees in the distance were covered with red leaves, resembling clusters of burning flames. Intertwined, they resembled breathtaking, colorful Chinese paintings. But at the moment, Ba Dong was in no mood to appreciate the scenery along the way. His mind was still filled with his brother-in-law Hong Tai-hung's phone call. He drove fast, reaching a speed of 180 kilometers per hour at his fastest, and constantly overtook other cars. The drivers being overtaken were so angry that they stuck their heads out of the car windows and cursed, "Are you rushing to see the King of Hell driving so damn fast?" But Ba Dong seemed not to hear and stepped on the gas again. The Volvo shot forward like a tiger descending a mountain, leaving the overtaken cars far behind. Since he first went to work at Factory 6803 in Miyun more than 10 years ago, Ba Dong had traveled this highway countless times. Initially, it was a gravel road, then a cement road, and eventually, it became an asphalt road. The grade of the highway was constantly upgraded, and the speed of the cars was increasing rapidly. Initially, it took more than 3 hours to travel from Beijing to Miyun, but now the journey took just over an hour. Ba Dong's familiarity with this highway surpassed that of any street in Beijing, so much so that he could remember every turn and fork in the road with his eyes closed. It can be said that this highway recorded Ba Dong's entire journey from a small salesman to becoming the head of a company with hundreds of millions of assets. In the beginning, director Liu Jiming was always driven by Ba Dong whenever he went to the city on business or traveled across the country. After he and Yanbei got married, he also moved his brother-in-law Hong Tai-hong to and from the large mansion by the Miyun Reservoir. Later, after he left Miyun and went to Beijing to serve as the general manager of the newly established Hurricane Investment Company Limited, he would arrange special personnel and cars to pick up and drop off Hong Tai-hong whenever he went to Miyun or returned to Beijing. Hong Tai-hong spent most of the year in the large mansion by the Miyun Reservoir, living a leisurely life. Although Liu Jiming was the company's chairman, Hong Tai-hong was the actual controller of Hurricane Investment until last year. Major company matters had to be approved by him, and significant events in the company were reported to him by Ba Dong and Liu Jiming at the mansion. According to Hong Tai-hong's instructions, Ba Dong never used a driver. Instead, he drove himself every time he went to the mansion. Ba Dong knew that the mansion was Hong Tai-hong's private villa, and that few outsiders were aware of it, except for a select few close friends and relatives. There were not many vehicles on the highway. Otherwise, such a fast speed would have inevitably caused an accident. To adjust his mood, Ba Dong turned on the audio knob, and a slightly hoarse male voice sounded. The first snow of 2002 came later than usual. The number 2 bus stopped on the 8th floor, took away the last fallen yellow leaf. The first snow of 2002 is the attachment left in Urumqi. You are like a butterfly flying back and forth, swaying in the season of flying snow. I can't forget the feeling of holding you in my arms, warmer than the heat hidden in my heart. I forgot the biting north wind outside the window, once again overlapping tenderness and lingering. It is your red lips that stick to everything about me. It is your consideration that makes me passionate again. It is your tenderness that melts the ice and snow slash. It is your sweet words that change the season. This was a song called The First Snow of 2002 that had just become popular not long ago, and Ba Dong had always liked it. His love for pop songs had developed in his college days. Of course, besides that, he had also been a tape vendor. Ba Dong rarely thought about this not-so-glorious experience now, but his love for pop songs had never changed. To this end, he had asked his driver, Xiao Ma, to purchase a large number of CDs and store them in the toolbox located next to the driver's seat. Every time he was in the car, he would pick a few to listen to. At this moment, listening to Dao Lang's low and hoarse singing, Ba Dong's originally disturbed mood gradually calmed down. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Big Brother is there to bear the burden even if the sky falls, so why should I worry about it? He immediately felt a lot easier. When Ba Dong arrived at the mansion, it was still daylight. Hong Tai-hong had already had dinner and was taking a walk in the courtyard. The so-called walk was just coming out in a wheelchair to get some fresh air. Breathing more fresh air after a full meal was not only good for digestion, but also greatly beneficial to the body's internal circulation, especially for someone who had been paralyzed for many years. Pushing the wheelchair was a plump woman. She appeared to be less than 30 years old, with short hair that reached her ears and a height of approximately 1.7 meters. Even while wearing loose-fitting light blue sportswear, she could convey a sense of vitality to others. Her facial features were not particularly attractive, with small eyes and a small nose, but her full lips made up for this, instantly making her face very appealing. Her name was Sheng Mei, and she was Hong Tai-hong's personal assistant. She was a gymnast on the national team, but she injured her waist in an overseas competition and retired to become a coach at the Miyun Sports School. Later, she was introduced to Hong Tai-hong by Liu Jiming to be his personal assistant. The so-called assistant was responsible for taking care of Hong Tai-hong's daily life. At first, Sheng Mei only came over to care for his life when Hong Tai-hong stayed at the mansion. Still, after Hong Tai-hong divorced his wife, Lin Lan, he also took her with him when he returned to Beijing. Sometimes they even returned to number 9 Bingma Hutong together, living together publicly. Ba Dong walked towards the wheelchair and called out like a soldier, reporting to his leader, "Big Brother, I'm here." Hong Tai-hung hummed in his nose and slightly raised his hand, resting on the wheelchair as a greeting. I was originally going to wait for you to arrive before eating together, but I played billiards with Mei Mei all afternoon and I was hungry, so I ate first, he said. His voice was deep and his energy was complete, unlike that of a person who had been confined to a wheelchair for many years. Ask Aunt Wu to make him a bowl of zhejiangmian, noodles with savory soybean paste. Remember to put more soybean paste. He tilted his head and instructed Sheng Mei Mei behind the wheelchair. Big brother, I'm not hungry. Let's talk about business first, Badong said anxiously. Don't worry, it's nothing big. Hong Tai-hung shook his head and said, then instructed Sheng Mei Mei. We'll take a walk first, and let Aunt Wu come and call us when the noodles are ready. Sheng Mei Mei hummed, released the wheelchair, and returned to the mansion. Only the two of them were left in the courtyard. Badong walked over, held the back of the wheelchair, and pushed it forward slowly. Compared with 10 years ago, this mansion seemed not to have changed in appearance. Of course, the trees in the courtyard had grown taller and more luxuriant than in the past. A thick layer of green moss had grown on the bluestone-paved ground, and foxtail grass grew here and there in the cracks between the bricks, giving people a sense of vicissitude. The autumn leaves were all over the ground, and when the wheelchair rolled over them, it made a creaking sound, like a rat running over wheat straw. Over the past 10 years, Badong had pushed Hong Tai-hung around the courtyard countless times like this, each time like a repetition of the last. It was in such repetitions that he, an insignificant young man from another province, gradually gained a foothold in Beijing and became the general manager Ba he is today. Which step could have been taken without the person sitting in the wheelchair? Badong looked at Hong Tai-hung, sitting in the wheelchair from behind. He saw that the top of his head was almost bald, leaving only a sparse circle of graying hair around it. His body was deeply sunk in the wheelchair, his thick spine leaning back, and his face was slightly upturned. Although Badong couldn't see his face clearly, he could also imagine the bright eyes lying beneath the two thick eyebrows, like X-rays, which were able to see the 5 internal organs clearly at a glance. Badong had had this feeling the first time he saw Hong Tai-hung at the mansion. It was a nearly divine gaze, sharp, profound, and insightful. No one could hide anything under these eyes. Even if he didn't say a word, you would feel a frightening majesty. Badong had rarely felt such majesty from anyone else. What puzzled him for a long time was that this person, who spent the year in a wheelchair and seldom went out, knew everything about national and even international developments. From the latest policies and high-level personnel changes to the latest situation in Kosovo, to the courtyard in a certain hutong in Beijing that was forcibly demolished, a new golf course built somewhere in the suburbs, or a black horse stock that had just been listed on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, he could come up with them at will and talk about them with relish. Of course, Badong was even more impressed with his familiarity with Beijing's intricate personnel relationships. It was as if he had a secret contact map hidden, and whenever he needed it, he could locate the person he required and utilize them for his own purposes. This was indeed the case. Every business that Badong had conducted since becoming the general manager of Hurricane Investment was done through that contact map. Without that map, he was just a blind man, not to mention developing an investment company with a registered capital of only 5 million yuan into a scale of hundreds of millions of capitals in just a few years. It would probably be challenging to gain a foothold in Beijing. Maybe he would still be a Beijing drifter with no fixed residence. Once upon a time, Badong had thought that Liu Shengping was the noble person in his destiny, but now he realized that Hong Tai-hung was the one who really changed his destiny. No, he should be called a god. Realizing this, Badong felt deeply grateful for Hong Tai-hung. This gratitude, like that for the parents who created his life, came entirely from his heart. Badong even felt that Hong Tai-hung's position in his life far exceeded that of his parents. This was, of course, not without reason, and everything should be attributed to that summer afternoon 10 years ago, on the lawn by the lake in the courtyard, when he and Yanbei had met. From that day on, the god of fate had indeed descended on Ba Dong's head, and everything had magically changed. Ba Dong pushed the wheelchair through the aisle next to the vineyard and continued forward. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the reservoir. The distant mountains and nearby hills were gradually submerged in the increasingly thick night. A layer of light purple twilight floated on the surface of the vast reservoir. The dam in the distance stood tall like a giant beast raising its head. The lights on the dam were like the eyes of a massive beast, radiating a faint blue glow. Ba Dong stopped and looked up, and he saw the lawn not far ahead, with the 2 white lounge chairs all unchanged as they had been 10 years ago. He seemed to hear Yanbei's chuckling. "I won't tell you." Then came Hong Tai-hung's stern gaze and equally stern tone. "I married my sister to you. Remember, if you let her suffer even half a grievance in the future, you will lose everything you have gained from me and become penniless again." These words were like ice falling on Ba Dong, making him feel chilled, but at the same time, he felt as if he had been blessed with some great favor, and he trembled with excitement like he was having chills. The evening wind brushed across the water's surface, bringing a touch of autumn coolness. Ba Dong couldn't help but shudder. Hong Tai-hung in the wheelchair seemed to notice and said, "The weather is getting cold. Let's go back to the house. The noodles should be ready." Ba Dong turned the wheelchair around and pushed Hong Tai-hung back to the courtyard. Aunt Wu's Zhejiangmian was authentic, unlike that of the most famous Zhejiangmian restaurant in Beijing, Niuniu. Not only were the noodles firm and chewy, but the side dishes were also complete, including shredded cucumber, shredded radish, green garlic, bean sprouts, celery, green beans, and garlic, all of which were red and green, making them particularly attractive. The paste was rich, fragrant, and mellow, and the meat was 40% fat and 60% lean, making people's mouths water just at the sight of it. Every time Ba Dong came to the mansion, he had to eat a large bowl. This time, because he was eager to talk to Hong Tai-hung, he finished the Zhejiangmian in the restaurant in a flash, leaving no strands. He put down his chopsticks and was about to leave when Aunt Wu called, "General Manager Ba, why didn't Miss come with you this time?" When Ba Dong first arrived at the mansion, Aunt Wu always called him Little Ba, affectionately. He didn't know when she changed to calling him General Manager Ba. Was it after he and Yanbei got married, or after he became the general manager of Hurricane Investment? Ba Dong couldn't remember. If Yanbei were a miss, then he would be a young master or a son-in-law. Ba Dong felt that this title was a bit awkward. He hummed vaguely and glanced at Aunt Wu. He noticed that the wrinkles on Aunt Wu's face and the white hair on her head had increased significantly, and he casually asked, "Where's your old man?" "Why haven't I seen him?" Aunt Wu said. "He twisted his back picking grapes a few days ago and went home to rest." Ba Dong said, "You've worked hard these years, thank you." Aunt Wu quickly said, "You're too polite. Hong, you and Miss treat us like family. If we have to say thank you, we should say it." A flattering expression on her face. Ba Dong was thinking about Hong Tai-hung and wanted to discuss something with him, so he didn't say anything more. He left the restaurant and went straight to the second courtyard. The backyard served as the kitchen and restaurant, while the front yard functioned as the living room and guest room. Ba Dong and Yanbei stayed in the front yard every time they visited the mansion. Hong Tai-hung's study, bedroom, and gym were all in the second courtyard. Hong Tai-hung received general guests in the living room in the front yard, and only a few private friends could enter his study. Even Liu Shengping had never been inside. Ba Dong entered the survey for the first time after he and Yanbei married. In this study, Hong Tai-hung, as a brother-in-law, had laid down 3 rules with him. When Ba Dong entered the study, he saw Hong Tai-hung lying on a genuine leather executive chair. Opposite him was a rosewood writing desk with 2 computers placed side by side. This was Hong Tai-hung's workstation. One computer was used to monitor and analyze the global securities and commodity futures markets and to transmit his opinions to the company's senior management and Ba Dong himself at any time. As the actual controller of Hurricane Investment, Hong Tai-hang had the final decision-making power over the company's significant investment projects. Therefore, it was no exaggeration to say that this computer was the central nervous system of Hurricane Investment. The other computer was explicitly used for Hong Tai-hang to write. His documentary literature, describing his life in the Heilongjiang Production and Construction Corps, titled "Blizzard is Coming," was written here. Liu Jiming specially designed that executive chair in Factory 6803. Not only was it made of special stainless steel, but its functions were also very special. It could be used as a seat for office work or as a recliner for massage and fitness. At this moment, Hong Tai-hang was lying flat on the executive chair, and Sheng Mei was massaging him. Hong Tai-hang had been sitting in a wheelchair for a long time, and he had to have a massage every day to prevent muscle atrophy. Before Sheng Mei came to the mansion to serve as Hong Tai-hang's personal assistant, Liu Jiming had sent her to a renowned massage training center in Beijing for 6 months of training. At this moment, Ba Dong saw that Hong Tai-hang and Sheng Mei had changed into pajamas and were dressed in indoor attire. Especially Sheng Mei, who had a very low neckline in her pajamas. When she bent her head to massage Hong Tai-hang, her plump breasts were about to burst out like 2 big white rabbits. Standing at the door, Ba Dong subconsciously averted his gaze. As he hesitated about backing out, Hong Tai-hang stopped him. "Come in," he said and made a gesture. Sheng Mei stood up, smiled faintly at Ba Dong with her lipstick-covered lips, and swayed her graceful figure towards the bedroom. The bedroom and study were connected, separated by only a door. Ba Dong hurried forward to straighten the reclining executive chair, helped Hong Tai-hang sit up, and then pushed the executive chair to a circle of sofas in the center of the study. The yellow poplar wood coffee table, situated in the middle of the sofa, was filled with seasonal fruits such as grapes and jujubes, most of which were picked from the fruit trees in the courtyard and were exceptionally fresh. Hong Tai-hang tidied up his pajamas that had been wrinkled during the massage, reached out from a square ivory box on the coffee table, and took out a Cuban cigar to put in his mouth. Ba Dong had brought it back to Hong Tai-hang when he went to Cuba last year. Hong Tai-hang habitually smoked a cigar whenever he talked about something important. Ba Dong picked up a lighter from the coffee table, snapped it on, and lit the cigar for Hong Tai-hang. "Old Liu's problem seems more complicated than I thought," Hong Tai-hang said slowly, with a puff of faint smoke. Finally, they had gotten to the point. Ba Dong habitually took out a palm-sized notebook from his briefcase, preparing to record while defending Liu Jiming. "Director Liu has always been very cautious," he said. "I didn't expect..." Although Liu Jiming's position had long changed, Ba Dong was still used to calling him Director Liu. "If you walk by the river often, how can you not get your feet wet?" Hong Tai-hang interrupted Ba Dong's words. "I just didn't expect him to fall on his private life, ultimately." Ba Dong had heard about Liu Jiming's problems before at Factory 6803, but he had never taken them seriously. Over the years, Director Liu had treated the factory as his home, working tirelessly for Factory 6803. After several sweeping reforms, he had developed a military factory on the verge of bankruptcy into a business group of this scale today. Liu Jiming made indelible contributions, but his strong military style also affected the interests of many people, especially the laid-off workers of Factory 6803, who simply regarded Liu Jiming as a mortal enemy and had been reporting him to the relevant departments. "Private life?" Ba Dong repeated softly. "Those people can't find a place to attack old Liu's reforms at Factory 6803, so of course they can only focus on his private life." A look of contempt appeared on Hong Tai-hang's face. From Wang Anshi to Zhang Zhuzhang, the fate of reformers has always been like this, and even the means they use are the same. But weren't those rumors about Director Liu before all rumors? What were rumors in the past aren't necessarily still rumors now. Isn't there a saying that rumors are often ahead of predictions? An inscrutable expression appeared on Hong Tai-hang's face. "It is said that old Liu has kept several mistresses, one of whom is an actress from the Oriental Song and Dance Troupe. Old Liu has bought each of them a house in Beijing. Could it be a fabrication? Badong couldn't believe it. Director Liu has always been more traditional and has a strong family concept. No matter how busy he was at work, he made it a point to go home every week to see his wife and child. I have driven him back a few times. Human nature. Anything is possible. Besides, they have obtained conclusive evidence this time. They know exactly how many illegitimate children old Liu has. Hong Tai-hong said here and turned his face to Badong. I heard that old Liu used to have a son who drowned in the Kyohe River. Is there such a thing? There is such a thing. Badong nodded. I heard about it when I first started working at Factory 6803. Director Liu has always been sorrowful and even carries a photo of his son when he goes on business trips. If one son dies, find women to have a few more. Hong Tai-hong laughed sarcastically. It seems that old Liu still has that feudal concept of carrying on the family line in his bones. Badong thought that Hong Tai-hang had no children and that he and Yanbei had not had any children since their marriage, so he didn't say anything. At this time, Hong Tai-hong had unknowingly finished smoking a cigar, leaned back, changed his tone, and said, The Commission for Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense and the Beijing Municipal Commission for Discipline Inspection have established a joint investigation team. Old Liu cannot be saved this time. Fortunately, a friend from the Discipline Inspection Commission told me about it 6 months ago, and we separated the company and the Hurricane Group in a timely manner. The problem now is that part of old Liu's private equity must be transferred as soon as possible, otherwise his problems will involve the company. What do you mean? My opinion is to let old Liu transfer his equity to you. Hearing Hong Tai-hang's words, Badong couldn't help but jump in his heart. According to the current equity structure of the company, Hong Tai-hang is the largest shareholder, followed by Liu Shengping as the second largest shareholder, and Badong as the third largest shareholder. If Liu Shengping's equity were transferred to Badong, he would logically become the largest shareholder of Hurricane Investment, the actual controller. Badong couldn't help but feel a little excited. This meant that from then on, he would be able to control the fate of Hurricane Investment completely. No, it was his own destiny. It's best to write the names of you and Yanbei on the part of the equity that old Liu transfers, Hong Tai-hong said in an inquiring tone. What do you think? Of course, it's possible it should. Badong nodded repeatedly, but a burst of disappointment filled his heart. The excitement he had just felt disappeared without a trace. Old Liu is locked up in the Niuniu detention center. I have already greeted the people there. You will go to old Liu tomorrow to discuss the equity transfer. Hong Tai-hang commanded, Remember, you must clearly explain the pros and cons to him, and you must not force him. You must let him transfer the equity consciously and voluntarily. Let him understand that doing so is not only for the company's sake, but also for his own sake. Hong Tai-hang said here and yawned, looking a little tired. Badong closed his notebook and stood up. Big brother, you should rest early. Hong Tai-hang hummed and raised his face to look at Badong. You will have more burden on your shoulders in the future. Badong felt trust and expectation from the other party's eyes. The disappointment he had just felt suddenly disappeared, replaced by a heartfelt gratitude. After all, they were the relationship between brother-in-law and brother-in-law. Badong was thinking wildly when he suddenly heard Hong Tai-hang say, After you talk to old Liu tomorrow, can you see Ding Weibang? Ding Weibang, Badong repeated the name, not understanding what Hong Tai-hang meant. He was the deputy secretary of the party committee of Factory 6803 before the restructuring of Hurricane Group, and he used to be Liu's competitor. He led the reporting against Liu. Hong Tai-hang frowned and said, You tell him not to keep staring at Liu endlessly, otherwise it won't do him any good. Badong heard a hint of threat in the other party's unfinished words. Hong Tai-hang was obviously worried that if Liu's problem continued to be dug up, it would eventually involve him. After all, the two had deep origins and an extraordinary relationship, and the mansion Liu Jiming had given him was already an open secret. Badong naturally understood that Hong Tai-hong's involvement would be detrimental to the company and himself, so he stated, "There's no problem with this. His son Ding Dong and I have a good relationship." That's good. A rare smile flashed across Hong Tai-hong's face, but this smile was like a wave of shallow water, disappearing as soon as it reached the corner of his mouth. He suddenly asked, "You and Yanbei have been married for almost 10 years, right?" Badong was stunned, unable to figure out why his brother-in-law suddenly asked this question and didn't answer for a while. "You are both in your 30s? No. Yanbei is a few years older than you, and she's over 40. You should have had a child long ago." Hong Tai-hong said in a brotherly tone, "I can't do it. The incense of our Hong family all depends on you." Badong didn't expect Hong Tai-hang to raise this question suddenly. He was speechless and didn't know how to answer, so he remained silent. Fortunately, Hong Tai-hang's phone rang, temporarily relieving him of his embarrassment. As usual, when Hong Tai-hang answered the phone, Badong habitually walked aside to avoid it. Taking advantage of this effort, he looked around the study, which he had come to countless times. Except for a row of bookshelves standing against the wall by the desk, the other 3 walls were lined with curio shelves, which were filled with antiques of all sizes, including Jun porcelains from the Ming Dynasty, Jingdezhen blue and white porcelain vases from the Song Dynasty, and bronze mirrors from the Tang Dynasty Imperial Palace, which were full of dazzling displays like a small museum. Badong couldn't say when Hong Tai-hong started to become obsessed with collecting. In the early days when he became the general manager of Hurricane Investment, he often drove him to Liu Lichang and other famous antique markets in Beijing to find treasures. Each time, he would bring back a few antiques in the trunk. Gradually, Hong Tai-hang's reputation for liking to collect spread in the circle of friends, and when visiting him, they no longer sent cigarettes, alcohol, tea, etc. as before, but changed to sending antiques. Among them were many folk treasures, such as the Empress Dowager Cixie's imperial seal, which Sun Dianying stole from the eastern mausoleums and was lost to the folk, which could be called national treasure-level cultural relics, which a deputy mayor of Chengde had obtained from the folk and given to Hong Tai-hong. The antiques in this study were only part of Hong Tai-hong's entire collection, and the other part was in the number 9 courtyard of Bingma Hutong. At this moment, Badong discovered that several more antiques had been added to the study. Just as he was about to get closer to take a closer look, Hong Tai-hong finished his phone call and coughed lightly. Badong turned around as if he had heard the signal. "Big brother, is there something wrong?" Hong Tai-hong closed the flip of his phone, glanced at Badong, and said, "It was Yanbei calling." His wife knew that he was with Hong Tai-hong but didn't call him. She called her brother instead. Badong felt a little uncomfortable, but it didn't show on his face. He just asked casually, "Oh, does she have something to do?" "It's nothing," Hong Tai-hong said dismissively. "My cousin recently established a film and television studio, which is the female writer Song Xiaofan that I mentioned to you before." Badong said, "Ah, I've heard of this name long ago. She's from our Dongjiang, and I've seen a movie adapted from her novel before." "I heard Yanbei say that she wants to adapt Blizzard is coming into a TV series and wants us to invest some money. What do you think?" Badong said, "Hong, I'll listen to you." "Huh?" Hong Tai-hong frowned unhappily. Badong realized he had slipped up and quickly corrected himself. "Big brother." 3. The End of a Hero. Miyun Detention Center is located at the foot of a mountain about 3 kilometers from the county town. Since the advance notice was given, the young guard only looked at Badong's ID and let him in. Badong waited for about 10 minutes in the visiting room before the guard led Liu Jiming out of the cell. He was surprised when he saw a man in uniform walk to the visiting window and sit down through the iron bars and glass. If it weren't for the empty sleeve, Badong wouldn't have believed that this was the famous entrepreneur Liu Jiming. His hair was disheveled, his face was swollen, his eyes were dull and lifeless, and he looked very old. When he saw Badong, he was slightly stunned, and his face showed an extremely complicated expression. That expression, perhaps only Badong could understand. His mind flashed back to the scene when he first met Liu Shengping on the train, and later, after being unable to find a job in Beijing, he worked as a salesman at the 6803 factory. The past scenes came one after another. In Badong's memory, Liu Shengping always wore a set of worn-out old military uniforms, and when he walked quickly, the empty sleeves fluttered in the wind, making a rustling sound. He was loud and could be heard from a great distance without the use of a loudspeaker during meetings. In Badong's eyes, Liu Shengping always works tirelessly, like those reformers in the movies, standing tall and tall, which makes him admire him. For a long time, Badong almost regarded Liu Shengping as his idol. At this moment, facing the old and swollen face, Badong felt as though he had overturned a 5-flavor bottle in his heart and felt very uncomfortable. He dared not even look into the other person's eyes, and Liu Shengping was also avoiding his eyes. Was he afraid to look at me or himself? Badong thought about this and smiled bitterly. He didn't know how to face his former boss, and his mouth seemed locked, unable to utter a word. But what he didn't expect was that before he could open his mouth, Liu Shengping spoke. "You're here." Liu Shengping smiled strangely. "Did young master ask you to come?" "Chairman, I came to see you," Badong said. He neither answered yes nor denied no. He felt a little unnatural when he called the other party chairman, as if it was an inappropriate or inaccurate title. He pondered the hidden meaning behind Liu Shengping's strange smile and thought maybe he should call him factory director, according to the old habit. But this might also be inappropriate. Badong felt that he was in a dilemma. Liu Shengping seemed not to need Badong to answer anything, as he knew everything. "I know why you came." As he spoke, his initially dull eyes suddenly brightened, revealing the shrewdness and sharpness that had often been evident in the past, along with a kind of military alertness. "Of course, but—" Badong searched for the right words, trying to accurately convey Hong Tai Hong, the eldest brother-in-law's meaning to Liu Shengping, but his mind was blank. He felt ashamed and even embarrassed that he hadn't read enough books when Liu Shengping suddenly raised his shackled hand, waving it dismissively. "Forget the buts. Isn't the young master just sending you to persuade me to transfer my shares? There is no need for persuasion. Bring out the contract and I'll sign." Badong looked at him carefully and was dubious about Liu Shengping's words. He saw no hint of pique or mischief. He pulled out a pack of Zhongnanhai cigarettes from his briefcase, offering one through the window to Liu Shengping. These were Liu Shengping's old brand. Liu Shengping paused, accepting the cigarette, holding it in his hand and examining it closely. He cracked his dry lips. "Since I came here, I haven't had a smoke." Badong lit the cigarette for Liu Shengping. He inhaled greedily, saying, "Badzong, I appreciate your remembering that I like Zhongnanhai. It's been years since I had one of these." "Don't call me Badzong. Just call me Little Ba like you used to," Badong said. "When I first came to Factory 6803, you were under a lot of pressure and you smoked heavily, sometimes 2 or 3 packs a day. You'd go through a carton of Yongnanhai in 3 or 4 days. But later, you didn't smoke Zhongnanhai as much. You were smoking foreign cigarettes." Liu Shengping finished the cigarette, the burden in his heart dissipating with the smoke. "All right, Little Ba." He raised his eyelids, looking at Badong. "You know about my relationship with Hong Tai Hong. My ability to build a career at Factory 6803 and Hurricane relied on the old leader, Tai Hong's father. My cooperation with Tai Hong all these years has been for the sake of the old leader. The old leader was too principled. He wouldn't even accept local specialties as gifts. I couldn't repay the old leader's kindness, so I could only repay Tai Hong. Of course, Tai Hong also helped me a lot. Without him, there wouldn't be a hurricane today." Liu Shengping gave a wan smile. "Go back and tell the young master to rest assured. I know what I should say and what I shouldn't say. The only person I feel I've failed is the old leader. If he were still alive, seeing me brought to this state, he'd be so disappointed." Liu Shengping stopped there, his eyes reddening, and he lowered his head again. Ba Dong took out the prepared stock transfer agreement and gave it to Liu Shengping for signature. As soon as he finished signing, the guard came to call him back to his cell. Liu Shengping stood up, took 2 steps, and then suddenly stopped, speaking in a solemn tone. Ba Zong, I have something to ask of you. Ba Dong hesitated. What is it? It's about Xingli, Liu Shengping said. My mother passed away a few years ago, and my wife doesn't need me to worry about her. The only one I'm concerned about is Xingli. She's graduating from middle school soon. If I hadn't gotten into trouble, I could have arranged everything for her, but now... He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing. If possible, could you take care of Xingli for me? Xingli was Liu Shengping's daughter. When he worked at Factory 6803, Ba Dong visited Liu Shengping's house by the Chao River Road more than once. Back then, Xingli was only 6 or 7 years old, with 2 little braids and big, bright eyes. Adorable. Every time she saw Liu Shengping coming home, she would rush into his arms, that closeness between father and daughter. 10 years had passed, and Xingli was about to graduate high school. With its pleading tone, Liu Shengping's last sentence made Ba Dong think of the phrase, fallen hero. His heart couldn't help but tremble. This was a father's request in dire straits. He couldn't refuse. All right, don't worry. I will definitely take good care of Xingli. Hearing these words, Liu Shengping said, Thank you, and breathed a sigh of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He turned and walked towards the cell. Watching Liu Shengping's figure disappear from the window, Ba Dong felt a sense of emptiness. He had never expected this would be the last time he saw Liu Shengping. 6 months later, Liu Shengping hanged himself in the detention center. Chapter 6, 1. The past is fading. Yanbei was quite surprised when she suddenly received a call from her cousin, Xiao Fanjia. Where are you? Tell me. Hearing the drawn-out tone from the other end of the line, Yanbei seemed to see the mysterious smile on her cousin Song Xiaofan's beautiful and dignified face. When Yanbei and her cousin played games together as children, she would always tilt her head and smile without answering when faced with a difficult question, deliberately testing her by asking, You tell me. Song Xiaofan was several years older than Yanbei and always spoke to her as if she were a little sister. Let me guess, abroad or Dongjiang? Yanbei guessed several times, but the other party denied them with a firm, no. I won't guess anymore, she pouted. Could it be that you are in Beijing? You guessed right, I'm in Beijing. Hearing Song Xiaofan's happy laughter from the phone, Yanbei was also pleasantly surprised. Really? That's great. I have been back in China and living in Beijing for a long time, right in Fangzhou Yuan, near the new campus of the Beijing Film Academy. I know. Ba Dong and I went there to look at apartments not long ago. Yanbei interrupted Song Xiaofan before she could finish, accusingly. You came to Beijing and didn't tell me? Are you still my cousin? It's not that your cousin didn't tell you, it's that I've been too busy, Song Xiaofan explained on the other end of the phone. I've been busy ever since I returned to Beijing from abroad, and I haven't even had time to go back to Dongjiang to see my parents. Yanbei listened to Song Xiaofan rambling on the phone for a long time and finally understood what was happening. It turned out that Song Xiaofan had returned to China half a year ago and had formed a film and television studio with several friends in the Beijing literary and art circles, keeping her extremely busy. This time she contacted her because she wanted to discuss some cooperative projects with her brother, Hong Tai-hong. Has Tai-hong Gay changed his phone number? I can't get through to him, so I had to call you. Yanbei originally wanted to tell her that her brother had 2 mobile phones, one new and one old. The old mobile phone number was printed on his business card and was open to the public, but he rarely turned it on. The new mobile phone was bought only 2 years ago, and only a few relatives and friends knew about it. Song Xiaofan had been abroad for so many years, so of course she couldn't know the new number, but the words reached her mouth and she swallowed them back, pretending to be angry and saying, Oh, so you only called me because you couldn't find my brother? When did you become like a businessman, so snobbish? Oh, good sister, you have wronged me so much, Song Xiaofan exclaimed exaggeratedly on the phone. The cosmetics I bought for you when I went to Paris have been with me all the time. If you don't believe me, I'll show you when we meet. Okay, I'm just teasing you. Yanbei saw that her cousin had taken it seriously and burst out laughing. I'll call my brother right away, but he went to that big house in Miyun again. I can't say for sure if he will come back to Beijing. The two sisters laughed and joked on the phone for a while. After hanging up the phone, Yanbei immediately called her brother, Hong Tai Hong. Her brother pondered for a while, neither saying he would come back nor wouldn't. Yanbei vaguely heard Badong's voice from the phone. She knew that Badong had rushed to Miyun that day, and they must be discussing something important. She originally wanted to call her husband, but she gave up on the idea after considering it. Her heart was quickly filled with joy at Song Xiaofan's arrival. Yanbei had admired and even worshipped Song Xiaofan since childhood. In her eyes, her cousin was not only beautiful, but also talented. She remembered that when she was a child, her uncle Song Qiangkun would come to Beijing for meetings and occasionally bring her cousin along. After getting off the train, he would go straight to Bingma Hutong and put his daughter in the No. 9 courtyard like a deposited item before going to the Jingxi Hotel to report. That was where the central government held important meetings, and her father and uncle often went together. Her brother had gone to the Great Northern Wilderness, and only she and her cousin were left in the No. 9 courtyard. Without the adults' supervision, the two sisters could just go crazy as they pleased, but no matter how crazy the two girls were, where could they go crazy to? Yanbei remembered that the craziest thing they did was to pick most of the grapes in the yard and pretend to take them to the entrance of the hutong to sell. That was still in May or June, and the grapes on the tree were still green and not yet ripe. When her father came back from the meeting, he felt sorry that his fruits of victory had been wasted and gave them a good scolding. Later, her uncle came to their aid. Once, after dinner, she and her cousin went to Beihai Park to play. That day was National Day, and it happened to be Fireworks Day. The park was crowded with people, and colorful fireworks bloomed in succession, illuminating the night sky and the white pagoda of Beihai. On the way home, she wanted to take a shortcut, so she took her cousin through Jingshan Park, turning and twisting, and somehow ended up on Coal Hill. The mountain was full of tall trees and dense forests, and the night was hazy. In the blur, she vaguely saw a crooked-necked tree in front of her, its branches twisting and turning, stretching out from the darkness like thick arms. She remembered that the history books said that Emperor Chongzhen hanged himself on Coal Hill, and she was immediately so frightened that her back was covered in cold sweat and her legs trembled. On the way down the mountain, she stepped on air and fell off the stone steps. Fortunately, her cousin grabbed her. Otherwise, she would have been miserable, but she still sprained her foot, and every step was excruciatingly painful. Later, her cousin helped her home. Although Song Xiaofan was only 3 years older than Yanbei, she seemed more mature in every aspect and had read more books than her. In addition to playing, the two girls mainly talked about novels. At that time, Yanbei had read almost all the stories in her brother's box. Song Xiaofan also enjoyed reading novels, and she had read all the novels that Yanbei had read. No wonder her uncle Song Qiangkun was a writer and had even published a book. Once, when they were talking about Anna Karenina and Madame Bovary, they both condemned Vronsky, Rodolphe, and Léon. However, when evaluating Emma and Anna, the two had some disagreements. Yanbei thought they were beautiful, romantic, and pure, dared to give everything for ideal love, including their lives, and were the perfect prototypes of all women. Song Xiaofan disagreed. There's nothing wrong with pursuing love, but why sacrifice your life? The most precious thing a person has is life. Without life, there is nothing. Besides, those two men were so selfish, wretched, and shameless. Is it worth dying for such men? Her cousin said with a look of disdain. Although Yanbei disagreed, she couldn't find any words to refute her. At that time, she was still a middle school student, and her cousin had already experienced living in the countryside and returning to the city to work as a member of a cultural troupe. She looked like someone who had seen the world and was much more mature than her. Later, Song Xiaofan began writing novels, following in her uncle's footsteps, and soon emerged in the literary world, becoming a well-known young female writer in Dongjiang province. While studying in the Dongjiang University writers class, one of her novels won an award. Once she came to Beijing for a meeting and paid a courtesy visit to the No. 9 Courtyard, bringing a box of Dongjiang gang cakes that her father liked to eat on behalf of her uncle. Yanbei noticed that her cousin was radiant and charming, and she seemed even more enchanting than she had in the past. She took a stack of group photos taken at the meeting and showed them to Yanbei, saying that this person was so-and-so and that person was so-and-so, all famous figures in the literary world. She pointed to an old writer with gray hair and a dignified demeanor and said, "Do you know him?" Yanbei shook her head, but she felt he looked a little familiar, probably because she had seen his picture in newspapers and magazines. "Li Xin," her cousin said, uttering a well-known name in the Chinese literary world. Yanbei couldn't help but let out a soft "oh," and found that her charming eyes flashed with a girlish blush. Not long after, Yanbei heard rumors about Song Xiaofan and Li Xin. Some said that the police caught them for illegally cohabitating in a hotel in Dongjiang. In contrast, others said they were in free love and that the local police were meddling in other people's affairs and infringing on human rights. There were many different opinions, and no one could agree. But the incident spread throughout Beijing's literary and artistic circles, which demonstrated its impact. Later, Song Xiaofan went abroad. It was said that Li Xin divorced his original wife and went to the United States with her. Before going abroad, Song Xiaofan called Yanbei, and her mood seemed a little low. She hung up the phone after saying a few words. 10 years had passed since then. During that time, Yanbei had received 2 letters from her cousin, stating that she had broken up with Li Xin soon after arriving in the United States and had married a descendant of a Taiwanese Kuomintang general. Yanbei had also told her about her marriage. That was all. Later, they stopped contacting each other, and she didn't even have the opportunity to inform her cousin when her father passed away 2 years ago. Until today, when she suddenly received her call. Thinking she was about to see her long-lost cousin, Yanbei couldn't help but feel a little excited. Since her father's passing, the No. 9 Courtyard in Bingma Hutong had become deserted, and few people visited it. After her brother and Lin Lan had divorced, her father forgave her brother before his death and agreed to let him return to the No. 9 Courtyard. However, her brother spent half the year living in that big house in Niuniu, and the vast No. 9 Courtyard was actually only occupied by Yanbei, Badong, and Niuniu. After her father passed away, Niuniu originally wanted to return to Shanxi, but 2 years after her old man passed away, her only son, who was a miner, was suddenly buried in a mine dozens of meters below the surface, and even his body was not found. No relatives were left in the family, so what was the point of returning? Yanbei kept Niuniu. "Auntie, don't go anywhere, just let me take care of you in your old age," she said. When Niuniu heard this, tears welled in her eyes, which were covered with fine wrinkles. At that moment, Yanbei truly regarded her as a member of her own family. Yanbei told Niuniu that her cousin was coming, and Niuniu was also pleased, saying, "Since your father passed away, we haven't had many guests at home. I have to clean up properly." "Of course," Yanbei said. "My cousin is not an outsider, so we'll just eat at home. Buy some more vegetables tomorrow morning." Niuniu was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, and she kept saying, "Yes, yes." Suddenly, she remembered something and asked, "What about the son-in-law? Is he coming back?" Niuniu had always referred to Badong as son-in-law, according to northern customs. Yanbei hesitated and said, "I don't know. Anyway, I told my brother to tell him." Niuniu looked at Yanbei, wanting to say something but stopping. 2. Everyone who comes is a guest. The next morning, Yanbei had just finished breakfast when a black BMW SUV drove into the number 9 courtyard. Song Xiaofan emerged from the car wearing a beige trench coat over a guest sundress, still radiating charm. She possessed an added, distinctly Western air compared to before she went abroad. She opened her arms wide for a big hug, then tilted her head back, scrutinizing Yanbei from head to toe, saying in an exaggerated tone, "Little sister, you still look like a middle school student, just as you did before." Her cousin often used to say this to Yanbei, a synonym for simple, but hearing it now made her feel somewhat uneasy. Was telling a woman over 40 that she looked like a middle school student a compliment or a jab? Song Xiaofan didn't notice Yanbei's subtle emotions. Releasing her, she rummaged through the luggage she'd brought and produced a pile of perfumes and cosmetics, introducing each one. They were all famous brands from New York, Paris, and London. "Sister, you know I rarely use cosmetics, especially perfume," Yanbei said softly. "When you were younger, you didn't need to. Youth itself is the best cosmetic. But who can withstand the knife of time?" Song Xiaofan said with a philosophical air. Yanbei subtly raised her face, glancing at her cousin. She thought the makeup on her face was too thick, like an actress on stage. "Look at me now. If it weren't for makeup, I'd look like a hideous old woman. My husband wouldn't even want to look at me in bed." Song Xiaofan's words reminded Yanbei of the rumors about her remarriage, so she asked, "My cousin-in-law, what's his name again? Is he a writer too? Why didn't he come back to China with you?" Song Xiaofan smiled. "His surname is Bai, so just call him Old Bai. Old Bai is worlds away from being a writer. He used to work in IT in Silicon Valley, but then he switched to an investment company." "Xiaofan Jia, you really keep up with the times," Yanbei said jokingly. "Alas, you don't know how much hardship I've endured abroad these years. Never mind, I'll find time to tell you slowly later." A shadow passed over Song Xiaofan's pretty, heavily made-up face. She changed the subject. "Look at me, just talking and forgetting to introduce my 2 friends." Only then did Yanbei turn her face towards the 2 people who had come with her. "This is Du Wei, a famous photographer from Dongjiang province," Song Xiaofan said, pointing to a tall man with slightly curly hair. Before Song Xiaofan could finish her introduction, the man named Du Wei modestly shook his head. "Song Laoshi, you flatter me. In our capital, I wouldn't dare call myself a famous photographer." He respectfully extended both hands, offering a business card as he spoke. Yanbei took the exquisitely printed card and glanced at it, seeing the words, "Chairman, Dongjiang Popular Arts Mudia Group," printed on it. "Oh, you're from the same hometown," Yanbei said casually, politely taking the card. "We're not just from the same hometown. Song Jie and I are also alumni of Dongda," Du Wei said in a tone that was obviously trying to get close to Song Xiaofan, his eyes darting around, giving the impression of someone quick-witted and shrewd. At this moment, Song Xiaofan interjected, "I heard your husband Ba Dong is also from Dongjiang?" Yanbei vaguely responded, "Yes, that's right." Du Wei immediately picked up the topic. "Ah, Ba Zong and I are both from Chuzhou. When he returned to Dongjiang to promote hurricane motorcycles, we even collaborated." It seemed that this person was already aware of her relationship with Badong. Had Song Xiaofan told him, or had he and Badong been in contact long ago? However, her husband had never mentioned this person to her. A trace of doubt flashed through Yanbei's mind, but she didn't want to discuss this topic, so she turned her gaze to the other person. "This is Diao Duhe, a famous screenwriter in Beijing. You should know him, right?" Song Xiaofan pointed to a small, somewhat sleazy-looking bald man next to Du Wei. The name sounded a bit familiar. Since he was a famous screenwriter, Yanbei, an editor at the TV Drama and Production Center, should have heard of him, but she couldn't recall any of Diao Duhe's works. "I wouldn't dare call myself a famous screenwriter before teacher Yanbei. In the Beijing film and television industry, I'm just an extra..." Diao Duhe nodded and bowed, saying it without humility. "I used to work on art design at the film studio. I love literature, and I usually study and write novels and screenplays. That's right, teacher Song Xiaofan is my idol. I've read every one of her novels." "Oh, let me introduce you. Lao Diao is one of the screenwriters of stories from the editorial board and also the assistant director. He recently completed a film script on his own, and Zhang Yimou has taken a fancy to it and is preparing to put it into production. As if to return the favor, Song Xiaofan also said, "That's right. Lao Diao is also a partner in our film and television studio. The film and television studio are just starting, so please support us, teacher Yanbei." Hearing the elderly Diao Duhe repeatedly call her teacher, Yanbei thought that this person was a little too humble. Stories from the Editorial Board was a TV series that gained nationwide popularity a few years ago, and it was first broadcast on their TV station, so Yanbei certainly knew about it. But since she wasn't responsible for editing it, she wasn't familiar with the primary creators. However, since he had written a script that Zhang Yimou had taken a fancy to, this Diao Duhe must not be an ordinary character. Song Xiaofan had just returned from abroad, but she was already very well connected in the Beijing film and television industry. This was somewhat beyond Yanbei's expectations. Thinking of what her cousin had said on the phone, she seemed to understand something. Oh, all who come are guests. Please sit down, please sit down." The weather was perfect. The morning sun was warm and bright, filling the air with the dry scent of autumn. Since her father's death, Yanbei had rarely tended to the vineyard. It hadn't produced grapes in the last 2 years, and the wind blew leaves all over the yard, making it look a little desolate. Niuniu had already swept it once in the morning, and the ground was spotless and very clean. In the middle of the yard was a round table and several old-fashioned chairs, which Hong Tai-hung used to use when he gathered with his friends. They looked a bit old. On the table was a tray with fresh fruit and several bottles of drinks. Yanbei had asked Niuniu to prepare everything to entertain the guests. A few people sat around the table, and the yard suddenly showed a long-lost vitality. Since her father's death, the number 9 courtyard had rarely entertained guests, and Yanbei was a little dazed for a moment. 3. Between husband and wife. Badong didn't return home until the afternoon. The first thing he said after entering the door was, "Susan, has she been here?" Yanbei had just woken up from a nap and was leaning against the headboard in a daze. She had drunk a glass of rum that Song Xiaofan had brought at lunch, and her head was still a little dizzy. She said lazily, "She left." Badong hung the suit he had taken off on the clothes rack in the bedroom corner and asked, "What did she say?" "Didn't I tell my brother on the phone?" Yanbei glanced at him. "Older brother didn't tell me the specific matter. Her film and television studio wants to adapt my brother's Approaching Blizzard into a TV series and asked if we would be willing to invest some money." Yanbei continued, "My cousin also brought a friend, Du Wei, the general manager of the Dongjiang Popular Arts Media Group. He said he's an old friend of yours." Yes, Badong said, facing the wall as he loosened his tie. He suddenly stopped. "But we haven't been in contact for many years. He has a tourism real estate development project and wants to cooperate with us." Yanbei couldn't see Badong's face and continued, "But his real intention seems to be to ask us to help them get their group listed." Badong was facing away from Yanbei and only heard the first sentence, not the second one, so he asked, "Tourism real estate project. Where exactly is it located?" "They say it's called Phoenix Island. Do you know that place?" "I know. It's not far from the provincial capital," Badong said casually. "How did you answer him?" "Investment matters, of course, have to be decided after Badzong comes back." Yanbei emphasized the words, Badzong, but there was also a hint of sarcasm in her tone. Badong obviously heard it. He turned around, looked at Yanbei, and said in a businesslike tone, "I talked it over with Lao Lu this morning, and he agreed to transfer his shares in Hurricane Investment. Also, older brother instructed that Lao Lu's shares should all be transferred to our names. That is to say, you are also a shareholder in Hurricane Investment and have the right to make decisions about the company's affairs." "Is that so?" Yanbei said faintly, seemingly uninterested in this. "Your friend surnamed Du said that there's a master on that island who is proficient in Yuanji Gong, who can not only retrieve objects from a distance but also treat various difficult and complicated diseases, including infertility and premature ejaculation. She stopped there, seeing Ba Dong suddenly blush. "Is there anything to eat in the kitchen? I'll go take a look." Ba Dong stammered, turning and walking out of the bedroom. Watching her husband's hurried departure, Yanbei suddenly felt a sense of almost mischievous pleasure. In that instant, she seemed to be back in that big house by the Niuniu Reservoir 10 years ago, on that sunny afternoon, the scene of her first meeting Ba Dong on the lawn. She thought this young man with a southern accent was really handsome, even a bit like Chen Yiming. Back then, when Chen Yiming returned from the great northern wilderness and first appeared in the No. 9 courtyard, he was about the same age as Ba Dong, full of youthful vitality. She never expected that this out-of-province youth she had met by chance would later become her husband. That day, when she and Ba Dong both returned to the house from the lawn, her brother and Lao Lu were still chatting in the living room. Seeing them come in, they suddenly stopped talking, and both turned their gazes towards them, lingering on her and Ba Dong for a full minute. Yanbei felt that her brother's gaze was a bit strange, or rather, meaningful. He quietly exchanged glances with Lao Lu, and Yanbei felt a little uneasy. After she had returned from the house, her brother had a serious talk with her. "Little sister, you're over 30. It's time to get married. Not only me, but Dad is also worried about you," he said. "Brother knows you still have Chen Yiming in your heart, but isn't he already married? He's a mayor now and doesn't even pay much attention to me. Why are you being so stubborn? Is there no man in this world worth marrying besides Chen Yiming? Love? What's love? Don't mention Emma and Anna to me. Those two women died for their so-called love. Yes, marriage without love is immoral. That's what Engels said, but never mind him. Not everything old Marx said is the truth. Have we not been harmed enough by these utopian preachings? Besides, what is love? Did Lin Lan and I have love? In the beginning, we were all about life and death, but what about now? You've seen it. Ever since I had the misfortune of being in a wheelchair, she hasn't given me a good look. Alas, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you. Brother is giving you a piece of advice. You can't hang yourself on one tree. In my opinion, the Ba Dong you met at the house last time is pretty good. Not only is he handsome, but he also has a good business mind. With some training, he may be able to support the Hong family. Lao Lu said that the young man hadn't been in their factory for long, but he was already the sales champion of Factory 6803. Lao Lu and I both think you two are a good match. Think about it carefully. I've already told Dad, and he doesn't object either. He just thinks that Ba Dong is 5 or 6 years younger than you and is concerned that it may impact your life together in the future. But what does that matter? Old Marx was several years younger than Jenny, too. Hearing her brother mention her father, Yanbei's heart skipped a beat. Her brother and father hadn't reconciled, but they had stood together on the matter of her marriage. She felt a little surprised, thinking that her father had changed a lot after retiring, becoming like the old men in Bingma Hutong who worried about family matters and the love affairs of their children. Once, a 3 or 4-year-old boy ran in from the neighboring kindergarten and stole some grapes from the yard. After being caught, her father not only didn't scold him, but also picked a large bunch of grapes for the child, saying with a smile, "Little one, come over whenever you want to eat some. Grandpa will pick them for you." The kind expression on her father's face moved Yanbei. She had to consider her brother's words seriously. Yanbei felt like a kite, drifting in the wind, unable to find a place to land. She remembered her wedding night. When Ba Dong's virile, muscular body was exposed before her eyes, she felt a wave of dizziness. She closed her eyes, expecting the arrival of the moment when she would become a true woman. In her imagination, that moment should have been a thunderous, lightning-fast burst of passion, a confluence and collision of beauty and power, like molten lava from a volcano possessing a heart-shaking power. But none of this happened. When she opened her eyes, she saw Ba Dong's face was exhausted and ashamed, and his previously virile and potent body seemed to have turned into a pile of mud. He was impotent. Thereafter, every intimate encounter was the same. Gradually, Ba Dong no longer slept in the same bed with her. Later, Ba Dong used the excuse of being busy with the company and often didn't come home at night, not even on weekends. Once, Yanbei went to the Hurricane building in Shidan and found a large pile of pornographic DVDs in the bedroom that had been temporarily partitioned out of Ba Dong's office. The women in them all had large breasts and hips and were extremely lewd. "So, the reason you make excuses not to come home is to hide here and watch these filthy things." She was shaking with anger, shouting at Ba Dong. "Why are you doing this? Is it because my face isn't pretty? My breasts aren't big enough, or—" She cried and wailed like a shrew in the hotong. "Besides watching pornographic DVDs, have you been seeing other women behind my back?" Under her relentless questioning, Ba Dong was terrified. "I swore to older brother that I would be good to you after we got married and would never see other women." She didn't believe him. "Then why are you so useless with me? Why?" Ba Dong lowered his head and muttered, "I don't know why it's like this. Every time I'm with you, I always feel like your father and your brother are standing behind me, staring at me, and that Chen Yiming." When Yanbei heard this, she suddenly understood something. Before they got married, she told Ba Dong about her and Chen Yiming, and she even showed him the letters she had written to Chen Yiming but hadn't sent. She originally wanted to use this to bid farewell to the past and demonstrate her determination to start a new life with Ba Dong, but she didn't expect it to backfire. Yanbei felt really stupid. She suddenly no longer hated Ba Dong, but rather felt a little sorry for this man who was 5 or 6 years younger than her. It was precisely because of this sympathy that Yanbei had never told her brother and father about the secret between her and her husband. When her father passed away 2 years ago, he was still thinking about when she and Ba Dong would add offspring to the Hong family. Her father, who had been a revolutionary his whole life, had ultimately come to believe in the traditional idea of passing on the family line and continuing the ancestral rites. Yanbei suddenly felt like she had let her father down. After a simple wash, Yanbei came out of the bedroom. As she passed through the second courtyard, she saw that the leaves on the jujube tree had fallen and the bare branches drooped down, looking like they were dying. She thought it was only early autumn, and the leaves were falling a little too early. Her father had planted this jujube tree along with the grapevines in the front yard. It used to be covered in jujubes every year. But since her father's death, it had suddenly stopped bearing jujubes, and now it was withering away as quickly as the vineyard. Thinking of the scene of her father watering and loosening the soil for the jujube tree and the grapevines in the garden every day after he retired, Yanbei couldn't help but feel a burst of sadness. Yanbei walked into her father's former study and office and sat down at the large desk where her father had sat. She looked at manuscripts at home most of the time, except for Mondays and Wednesdays. There was originally a small study next to the bedroom, but after her father's death, she moved to her father's study to look at manuscripts. It wasn't because her father's study was significant, but because she had a special feeling for this room. After her father's death, the furnishings in the room remained the same as before, and the large photo of her father and mother was still hanging on the wall. Whenever Yanbei sat in the room, she felt as though her father and mother were watching her with loving eyes from behind, making her feel warm and grounded, as if she had returned to her childhood. Not long after her father's death, her brother wanted to put his collection of antiques in her father's study, but Yanbei stopped him. She didn't like the antiques, which always seemed to exude a musty, tomb-like odor to pollute the clean air in the study. "Don't underestimate these antiques. You can buy a small courtyard house in Beijing with any one of them," her brother said, not without showing off. Yanbei believed that he wasn't lying. She didn't know when her brother had become obsessed with collecting. She couldn't even say for sure what her brother's current identity was. Former regimental commander of a specific regiment of the Great Northern Wilderness Production and Construction Corps, former section chief of a specific department of the National Development and Reform Commission, the actual controller of hurricane investment, a collector, and her brother had also written a non-fiction book called Approaching Blizzard, and the newspaper interview called him a educated youth writer. Yanbei couldn't put these disparate occupations and titles on her brother. If she had to give him a title, it would be better to call him a broker. Over the years, her brother had leveraged his connections in the political world to secure approvals, establish connections, and serve as a liaison for those seeking advancement and financial gain. He had been very successful in Beijing. Even the provincial-level leaders from those other provinces had to address him respectfully as Hong Ye. For someone who had lived in a wheelchair for a long time, this was indeed a miracle. But no matter what, he was her own brother. Moreover, as a disabled person, her brother's life was unfortunate. After divorcing Lin Lan, he could only live in a vague and ambiguous relationship with a retired gymnast named Sheng Mei. When her father was alive, her brother had never dared to bring this woman to the No. 9 courtyard, but soon after her father passed away, he brought Sheng Mei back. On one occasion, he even left the door open and engaged in lewd acts in the room. That time, she had initially gone to her brother to ask about something. Seeing that the door was open, she walked straight in and saw her brother sitting in a wheelchair. Sheng Mei was standing naked, exposing a pair of full breasts and spreading her long, white and tender legs. Her brother had his head buried between her legs, sucking like a child. She screamed as if she had seen a ghost and ran out of the room. From then on, she always felt that the entire No. 9 courtyard was filled with a disgusting smell, as thick and lingering as that of sour rice soup or milk. A sound of light footsteps approached from afar. Someone walked into the study, holding a bowl of Lingji lotus seed soup, and placed it next to Yanbei. She knew it was her husband Badong without looking up. Every time she returned home, Badong always served her so carefully, as if he was not her husband but a servant. The same was true in bed. Although he was always unable to do it, he wanted to prove to her that he had tried his best. Did he really try his best? Badong clearly admitted to her that he had a girlfriend in college. He also showed her a photo of his ex-girlfriend. She was a beautiful girl with a plump figure, as sexy as the women in the pornographic discs he watched in the company. How could a man who likes sexy women be impotent? This doubt lingered in Yanbei's heart for many years, prompting her to consider divorcing Badong repeatedly, but for her father's sake, she gave up each time. Her brother was already divorced. If she were to divorce again, would her father be able to bear it? But after her father passed away, this idea popped up again like a ghost. Yanbei slowly raised her eyes from the manuscript before her and turned to Badong. She suddenly found that this man, several years younger than her, had several centipede-like wrinkles on his forehead. In the past, this handsome face was smooth and flawless. As a man, Badong was undoubtedly outstanding. In this regard, her brother was indeed not wrong. In less than 10 years, Hurricane Investment grew from a small company with a registered capital of only a few million to its current size. Although it was mainly due to her brother's connections, Badong's contribution as a trader was indispensable. In any case, he is now an investor with a considerable fortune. As a young man from a poor family in another province, he could have achieved his current status in the capital city, which was renowned for its abundance of talent. I am afraid that even he himself could not have expected it, but he also paid a price for this, a man's price. Yes, what price is heavier than marrying a woman you don't love? Yanbei thought of this and suddenly felt a deep sympathy for the man before her. It was this sympathy that once again suppressed the idea that she had been thinking about for a long time. If she really filed for divorce, wouldn't it mean that his career, which he had worked so hard for so many years, would be ruined in an instant? She hesitated again. The people from the logistics department of Dad's unit are here again. We must vacate Courtyard No. 9 by the end of this year. Yanbei took a sip of the Ganoderma lucidum and lotus seed soup and discussed family affairs in a tone of voice. According to the regulations, we should move out after Dad passes away. Let's move, Badong said. The contract for the house in Fangzhou Garden has been signed, and we can move in after paying the money. But Big Brother said last time that he hopes we can buy a villa, Yanbei said. There is a high-end residential area in Xiangshan that has just been launched. The developer is my eldest brother's former colleague in the Development and Reform Commission. We can get a 20% discount. Oh, that's it. Then let's listen to Big Brother. Badong immediately changed his tone. Let's buy a villa, he said. When Big Brother returns from Miyun, he can live with us. His attitude changed so quickly. Yanbei couldn't help wondering if her brother had found a brother-in-law for her or a white glove who would absolutely obey him. She smiled bitterly and changed the subject. By the way, your friend Du Wei invited us to Dongjiang for a field trip. Badong glanced at her and muttered, Actually, I can't say that person is a friend to me. We are just acquaintances. Seeing that he seemed worried about something, Yanbei asked, Are you unhappy because he didn't contact you and came to me first? No, isn't it the same whether I come to you or me? Badong said hurriedly. I just think that you shouldn't invest in that project just because he's my fellow villager and friend. Project investment is your and my brother's business. I'm not interested. Yanbei smiled faintly. But I do want to go to Dongjiang. I've been married for so many years, and I haven't been to your hometown yet. Really? Badong seemed not to believe her words. He was stunned for a moment before saying, That's great. What time? I'll arrange the company's affairs and accompany you. Yanbei believed that Badong's reaction was sincere, and so were her words. She really wanted to visit Badong's hometown. After all, they were a couple who had lived together for 10 years. Thinking of this, Yanbei couldn't help but mutter, Does the master from Phoenix Island really have such great abilities?